Hello there and welcome to Just About Earth, where curiosity stretches its legs and takes the scenic route, while your mind finds a comfortable place to settle. Tonight, we're going to explore a question that can sit quietly in the back of your head for years, before suddenly demanding your full attention. It's not a question with a clear answer. It's not even a question everyone would want to think about for too long, but it's one that can make you tilt your head and see everything in your life from a different angle. The question is simple enough to say out loud, yet complicated enough to change how you feel about almost everything. What if Earth was a test, not a figure of speech, not a clever metaphor, a real test, the kind that is set up on purpose, the kind that has an observer, the kind where your choices, your struggles, and the way you live might actually be recorded, reviewed, and evaluated? Maybe it's a higher intelligence that designed it. Maybe it's an ancient power we used to call gods. Maybe it's an alien civilization from somewhere so far away that we would never notice their presence. Or maybe, and this is where it gets even stranger, it's us. Future humans, reaching back through time or through technology, setting the stage for their own ancestors and watching how the story plays out. You might have already felt flashes of this idea before, even if you didn't call it that. Times when life feels strangely staged, when things line up a little too neatly, when someone enters your life at the exact moment you need them, or an event happens that seems engineered to make you question yourself. And yet, before we wander too far into possibilities, I'd like to ask you something much smaller. Where in the world are you listening from right now? Are you somewhere that feels familiar, or are you travelling? Is it daytime or night where you are? The world is spread out across so many time zones, and yet here we are, arriving in the same moment together. Your version of now might be bright with morning light, or it might be wrapped in shadows and quiet. If you're listening while winding down, maybe this will be a calm companion to the end of your day. If you're starting fresh, maybe this will be a steady hum in the background as you step into whatever comes next. If you find this kind of slow exploration enjoyable, if it's the sort of conversation that you like to drift into, it would mean a lot if you gave the video a like and maybe subscribe to the channel. That helps this small space find others who might be looking for something thoughtful to end their day or start it. And now that we've set the pace, we can begin to walk through this idea together without rushing. Because thinking about Earth as a test isn't about finding an answer as quickly as possible. It's about noticing what changes in the way you see things when you keep that question in the background. The first thing that comes to mind is that the word test doesn't always mean the same thing to everyone. In school, it might have meant rows of desks, a sheet of paper with small boxes to fill, and a clock on the wall making each second feel heavier. In life, a test can mean much more than that. It can be a measure of what you've learned without realizing you were learning it, a way to see how you react under pressure, or how you behave when no one is telling you what to do. In this thought experiment, Earth as a test doesn't have to mean we're all sitting in the same room taking the same questions. It could mean each person is facing their own unique version of it, tailored in ways they don't even notice. You might already be thinking about the conditions that make life here possible, the strange balance of factors that let us exist at all. Earth is neither too close to the sun nor too far. It has the right mix of elements, the right atmosphere, the right protection from radiation. Its magnetic field shields us from solar winds that could strip the planet bare. Its orbit is stable, its seasons are predictable enough to let life plan ahead. When scientists talk about the Goldilocks zone around a star, they're describing planets that are just right for life as we know it. But if Earth is a test, these conditions might not just be lucky accidents. They might be the carefully chosen settings of an exam designed to see what life would do if given the perfect starting ground. That raises another thought. If this is a test, what are the questions being asked? Are they about survival, whether we can adapt to changing climates, natural disasters, or the endless list of diseases that try to take us down? Are they about morality, how we treat each other when resources are scarce, or when we have too much? Are they about cooperation, whether we can work together despite differences in language, culture, and belief? Maybe they're about something we haven't even considered, some hidden variable that is the real point of all of this. You might be wondering if there's any sign that we're being observed, and if there is, whether we'd even recognize it. If a higher intelligence wanted to see how we behave naturally, they wouldn't exactly make themselves obvious. They'd stay hidden, letting events unfold without interference. Or perhaps their interference would be so subtle that we'd mistake it for chance. A sudden change in weather that forces two strangers to meet. A small sequence of events that keeps you from taking a certain path one day. It's easy to write these off as coincidence, but if Earth were a test, those moments could be more like controlled variables in an experiment. Of course, this idea isn't entirely new. Many ancient cultures and religions have taught that life is a kind of trial. In some beliefs, the purpose is to see if you live according to certain moral laws, with the outcome determining your fate after death. In others, it's a journey meant to teach the soul lessons it couldn't learn any other way. The details vary wildly, but the core idea, that we're here for a reason beyond just existing, appears again and again. In that sense, thinking about Earth as a test isn't so much inventing a new concept as it is looking at an old one with fresh eyes. Some people find that idea comforting. If life is a test, then suffering isn't meaningless. Struggles have a purpose, even if we don't know exactly what it is. Others find it unsettling because it suggests we're constantly being judged, and that there might be consequences we can't see coming. Either way, it changes how you might look at your day-to-day life. The moments when you're kind to someone for no reason, the decisions you make when no one is watching, the way you respond when things go wrong. If these are all part of an assessment, it makes you notice them differently. There's also the possibility that the test isn't about individuals at all, but about humanity as a whole. Maybe it's less about whether you or I personally pass, and more about whether our species can reach certain milestones. Develop sustainable ways to live. Avoid wiping ourselves out with our own technology. Learn to communicate without turning every disagreement into a war. If that's the case, then every generation might just be another round of data collection, another group of participants in a long-running study. It's hard not to think about the big events in history when you look at it that way. The sudden rises and falls of civilizations, the repeating patterns of conflict and peace, the breakthroughs in science and the setbacks that follow. From a certain angle, it can all look like the progress reports of a long-term experiment, one that has been running for thousands of years, maybe even longer. If you've ever heard the phrase trial by fire, you might recognize that this idea has a lot in common with how humans already test themselves. We create challenges to push ourselves beyond comfort. We set rules and see if we can follow them. We invent games and competitions that have no real-world necessity, just to see who can overcome obstacles. If we do this to ourselves for entertainment or personal growth, it's not impossible to imagine that someone, or something, might be doing it to us on a much larger scale. And here's where it starts to get interesting. If this is a test, we might not be graded on the outcome alone. We might be graded on the process, on how we handle the test itself, if we panic, if we cheat, if we give up, or if we persist even when the questions are harder than anything we've prepared for. The way we approach the unknown could be the real measure, which means that even asking the question, what if Earth is a test, might itself be part of it. If you never consider it, maybe you're meant to go through life focusing on the here and now. If you do consider it, maybe the next step is to see what you do with that thought. And so, as we settle into this line of thinking, we'll keep walking forward. We'll look at how the planet seems built for life, how the challenges we face might be more than random chance, and how stories from the past to the present might all be pointing to the same strange possibility. If you sit quietly with the idea that Earth might be a test, the first thing that happens is the world around you starts to look slightly different. The chair you're sitting in, the walls around you, the sound in the background, even the way the air feels on your skin. They all take on a strange quality, as if they're part of a setting that was arranged rather than just something that happened to be there. It's a bit like walking into a room you've been in 100 times and suddenly noticing a detail you've never seen before. The place hasn't changed. You have. That's what makes this thought so persistent. It's not something you can entirely prove or disprove, but once you've considered it, you start running everyday life through a new filter. The long commute you've always hated, is it just an inconvenience, or is it meant to teach you patience? The sudden challenge you didn't expect, bad luck, or part of an intentional obstacle course. Even the people you meet, the ones who seem to appear at exactly the right or wrong moment, start to look like pieces on a board that someone else has arranged. It's worth noticing how often humans naturally fall into this way of thinking without even trying. We talk about everything happens for a reason when events line up in a way that feels meaningful. We tell stories about fate, destiny, and being meant to cross paths with certain people. Whether you take those phrases literally or not, they show that we're comfortable with the idea that there might be more to life than random chance. If Earth is a test, then those moments of alignment could be the hints, subtle nudges that there's a structure beneath the surface. But the real weight of this question doesn't come from the possibility that we're being tested. It comes from realizing what that would imply. If this is a test, then there's a purpose to the design. That means the conditions here, the good, the bad, the things that make no sense, and the things that seem perfectly balanced, aren't just accidents. They're chosen. Every storm, every illness, every technological breakthrough, every stretch of peace, every war could be a part of the exam. That's where the thought stops being like curiosity and starts becoming heavier. This isn't about paranoia. It's not about imagining that there's a shadowy figure watching you through hidden cameras. It's about zooming out so far in your imagination that you can look at the entire planet and everything on it as one connected system. Picture it from space. Not just the continents and oceans, but the constant swirl of clouds, the pulse of city lights at night, the shifting patterns of weather, the migrations of animals, the movements of people. It's a living, breathing sphere where billions of individual lives are happening all at once, each person thinking they're simply going through their own story. If there's a designer, they're watching all of it together, the same way you might look at the screen of a strategy game and see every unit moving in real time. When you put it like that, the next thought comes quickly. What would the goal be? If you were the one running this experiment, what would you want to know? Would you be looking for the most adaptable individuals, the kindest, the most intelligent? Or would you be watching for the group as a whole to reach a certain point before deciding they've passed? You could imagine hundreds of possible objectives, from moral development to technological achievement to some unknown quality that we don't even have a name for. Ancient traditions leaned heavily toward morality. In many belief systems, the test of life is about how you treat others, whether you follow certain rules, whether you act with compassion and integrity even when it's difficult. The reward for passing might be entry into a paradise, moving on to another existence, or simply avoiding punishment. But in modern thought, especially in scientific speculation, the scope is much broader. If the observer is an alien civilization or future humans, their interest might not be in individual morality at all. They might be measuring survival instincts, problem-solving, creativity, or the ability to cooperate on a global scale. What makes this line of thought more compelling is that tests often don't reveal their real purpose until they're over. Sometimes you're told you're being measured on one thing when in reality you're being measured on something else entirely. In training programs, games, and even psychological experiments, the stated goal is often a distraction. The real data comes from how you react when you think you're being tested for something different. If Earth is like that, the things we think matter most might be the wrong metrics entirely. Then there's the question of whether the participants, us, are meant to know it's a test. In many situations, awareness changes behaviour. If you know you're being graded, you might try harder. You might also try to game the system. That could be why, if there is an observer, they'd prefer to remain hidden. Or maybe the awareness itself is one of the questions. What do people do when they begin to suspect there's more going on than meets the eye? Do they seek answers, try to communicate with whoever's in charge, or ignore it entirely? It's also possible that the test is layered. At the smallest scale, each of us might be evaluated individually. How we handle our personal hardships, how we treat others, whether we keep going when things get difficult. At the larger scale, the species might be evaluated collectively, whether we destroy ourselves, whether we find a way to live sustainably, whether we spread beyond our planet. If both levels are in play, then the experiment becomes far more complex, with individual choices rippling out into the larger group's outcome. History offers plenty of material for that kind of analysis. Civilizations rise, innovate, and fall. New ones grow in their place, often making the same mistakes, sometimes learning from the past, sometimes forgetting it entirely. Technology transforms the way we live, opening possibilities our ancestors couldn't have imagined, but also creating dangers they never faced. We cooperate when it's convenient, compete when it's not, and in the process, shape the future for everyone. It's messy, unpredictable, and full of contradictions, which makes it exactly the kind of environment that would generate interesting results if someone were observing. And that brings us to the unsettling part. If it is a test, then it's not necessarily a safe one. Tests can be designed to push you to your limits. They can be timed, with a set endpoint that you don't know about. They can be structured so that only some pass. They can include trick questions, distractions, and moments where the wrong move cost you more than you expected. None of that would feel fair if you didn't know it was a test. But fairness might not be the point. The point could be to see what you do under exactly those conditions. It's not all grim. If the test is meant to measure growth, creativity, or problem solving, then every challenge is also an opportunity to succeed. Every unexpected turn is a chance to prove adaptability. The moments that seem most like setbacks could be the ones that count the most toward whatever the final result is. It's just that without knowing the scoring system, we can't be sure. That's part of what makes the question so powerful. It forces you to think about what's worth doing, even when you don't know how you're being evaluated. And so the question keeps changing the way you see things. You can't help but look at the structure of the world, the balance between order and chaos, the way life clings to every corner of the planet, the way humanity keeps pushing forward despite every obstacle, and wonder if that balance is the key, whether we're meant to find a way to live with it, to change it, or to learn from it. You start to notice that even small choices could matter more than they seem. That kindness to a stranger, persistence in the face of boredom, curiosity about the unknown. All of them might be quiet parts of a much bigger evaluation. The question doesn't go away once you've asked it. It just waits in the background, reshaping the way you notice patterns, coincidences, and challenges. And once it's there, it's only natural to start looking at the conditions of the planet itself, the stage where all of this happens, and wondering if its design offers more clues. If you imagine Earth as a testing ground, the first thing you'd probably want to do is examine the setup, the environment, the stage, and when you start doing that, the planet begins to look suspiciously well prepared for the role. It's as if someone went through a checklist, making sure that conditions were balanced just enough to make life possible, but not so easy that it would be effortless. The more you look at the details, the more they start to feel like part of a deliberate configuration. The obvious starting point is distance from the sun, too close, and the heat would strip away the atmosphere, boil the oceans, and fry anything trying to exist on the surface. Too far, and we'd be locked in permanent ice, our planet a frozen sphere with nothing but wind and shadow. But here we are, orbiting at a range that is almost suspiciously perfect, the so-called Goldilocks zone. We get warmth without being incinerated, sunlight without being cooked alive, and that's just the first setting. The tilt of the planet's axis seems equally intentional. At roughly 23.5 degrees, it gives us seasons, not too extreme in most places, not absent entirely. Those seasons shape agriculture, animal behaviour, and the rhythms of human life. If the tilt were much greater, weather would be violent and unstable, with half the planet enduring extremes that might make civilization impossible. If it were much smaller, the climate would be static, lessening variety and reducing some of the pressures that drive adaptation. From a testing perspective, seasons make sense. They require life to adapt, to plan, to change behaviours. They introduce a predictable but still challenging pattern to existence. Then there's the moon. It's unusually large compared to the size of the Earth, and it sits at just the right distance to create tides that stir the oceans without flooding continents. Those tides may have been critical to the development of early life, creating coastal zones where nutrients and conditions shifted regularly, driving evolution forward. The moon also stabilizes Earth's rotation, preventing chaotic wobbles that could make the climate unpredictable. In a test, stability in the long term combined with manageable short-term challenges is an excellent way to see how life evolves. The moon's presence checks both boxes. Our atmosphere is another strangely precise feature. It's thick enough to shield us from meteors and radiation, yet thin enough to let in the sunlight we need. It holds the right mix of gases, mostly nitrogen and oxygen, with just enough carbon dioxide to help regulate temperature without tipping into a runaway greenhouse effect, at least until humans began altering that balance. If the air were much different in composition, we wouldn't be here. Oxygen at too high a concentration could make fires uncontrollable. Nitrogen at too low a level could destabilize processes life depends on. It's all finely tuned in a way that feels less like random chance and more like careful calibration. Even the magnetic field fits the pattern. Generated by movement in Earth's molten core, it deflects solar wind and cosmic radiation, which would otherwise strip away our atmosphere over time. Mars, for example, lacks a strong magnetic field, and its thin atmosphere can't protect it the way ours does. Without that invisible shield, Earth would be far more vulnerable to bursts of solar energy that could damage ecosystems and disrupt any emerging civilizations. If you were designing a long-term experiment with complex participants, you'd want to give them protection from catastrophic interruptions. Not complete safety, but enough to let the test run for billions of years. Water, too, sits in a sweet spot. We have a global system where it exists in all three states, solid, liquid, and gas, moving constantly between them. That cycle regulates climate, supports diverse ecosystems, and provides the variety of environments needed for different forms of life to emerge. A test without variety would produce narrow results. By contrast, Earth's range of environments, deserts, rainforests, tundras, oceans, mountains, pushes life to adapt in countless ways. The outcome is a biosphere so diverse that no single catastrophe wipes it all out. That kind of resilience could be exactly what you'd want to measure. The planet's geology plays a part as well. Plate tectonics not only shape continents and create mountains, but also recycle carbon, regulate temperature over geological timescales, and generate fertile soils through volcanic activity. Without that process, Earth might have stagnated, its surface becoming unchanging and lifeless. With it, the world is in a constant state of renewal, creating opportunities for new species to emerge and thrive. From the perspective of a test, geological change is like hitting the reset button in certain areas without shutting down the whole system. Even the dangerous aspects of Earth start to look like deliberate design when you consider them in this light. Hurricanes, earthquakes, droughts, and volcanic eruptions cause immense suffering and destruction, but they also force adaptation. They push societies to develop technology, cooperation, and long-term planning. They test resilience on both an individual and collective level. A perfectly safe, unchanging world might be comfortable, but it wouldn't reveal much about how life responds to pressure. When scientists talk about the improbability of life emerging here, they often mention the sheer number of factors that had to align. It's not just one or two lucky breaks, it's dozens of them. The Sun is unusually stable for a star of its size. Our solar system has giant planets like Jupiter that act as gravitational shields, deflecting comets and asteroids that might otherwise smash into Earth far more often. The chemical composition of the planet matches exactly what's needed for biological processes, down to trace elements that are rare elsewhere. Some people point to this as evidence of fine-tuning. Others see it as the inevitable result of the anthropic principle, the idea that we can only observe a universe that allows for our existence, so of course it looks perfect to us. But if you lean into the test scenario, that fine-tuning is simply the setup. The experiment begins with a starting environment where success is possible, but not guaranteed. That way you can see what happens when life is given a near-perfect foundation, and then challenged with unpredictable changes. It's also worth noting how fragile some of these balances are. Tilt the conditions too far in one direction, and the whole system collapses. Ice ages can lock away huge portions of the planet's water for thousands of years. Shifts in atmospheric composition can tip the climate into inhospitable extremes. Large impacts from space can reset the evolutionary clock, and yet despite at least 5 mass extinction events in the last half-billion years, life has returned each time, often in new and more complex forms. From a certain point of view, that's exactly what you'd want to see in a test. Not perfection without struggle, but recovery after devastation. When you think about how life has navigated these cycles, you start to notice that the test, if it exists, isn't just about survival in the short term. It's about persistence over spans of time so long that our species can barely comprehend them. From the earliest microorganisms to the rise of mammals, the planet has been a proving ground for endurance, innovation, and adaptation. We are simply the latest participants in a process that has been running for billions of years, and that leads to the uncomfortable possibility that we're not the first intelligent species to take part. If Earth has been set up to produce complexity, then intelligence might not be unique to us. It could have arisen before, in forms that left no trace we've found yet, and then vanished. Whether through self-destruction, environmental collapse, or forces beyond their control, they might have failed their version of the test. If that's true, then our existence is just the latest iteration, and the conditions we see now might be the refined result of many previous runs. Looking at it this way, every part of the natural world, from the predictable orbit of the moon to the deep ocean currents, starts to feel like an intentional variable in a massive ongoing trial. The question then shifts from, is Earth perfect for life, to why was it made perfect enough for life to thrive, but imperfect enough for life to be constantly challenged? That's where the test hypothesis starts to gain weight. A perfect paradise wouldn't push growth. A hostile wasteland wouldn't allow it. This in-between state, balanced on the edge of stability and chaos, is exactly where the most revealing results would emerge. When you step outside and look around with this in mind, the details hit differently. The way trees pull carbon dioxide from the air and give back oxygen, the way pollinators keep entire ecosystems functioning, the way weather shifts just enough to keep you guessing. All of it starts to feel less like the background noise of life, and more like a carefully constructed environment, tuned to see what you'll do with it. And if the stage is this finely built, then the next question is about the script, whether the challenges and opportunities within this setting are as deliberate as the conditions themselves. Because if the planet has been prepared with such precision, it would be strange if the events that take place here were purely random. If the planet itself feels like a stage that's been set for something, the next thing to notice is that life here doesn't happen without a set of rules. We may not remember agreeing to them, we may not even fully understand them, but they're there, and they shape everything we do from the moment we arrive until the moment we leave. Some of them are obvious, written into the laws of physics and biology. Others are subtle, invisible boundaries we only notice when we bump against them. And if Earth really is a test, these rules could be the hidden instructions, the fine print of the exam, the part you never get to read until it's already over. The most unavoidable one is simple. Time moves forward. No matter what you do, you can't slow it, pause it, or reverse it. You can't go back to redo a moment or skip ahead to see how something turns out. Every choice you make locks in the path behind you and reshapes the one ahead. In a test, that would be one of the most effective rules of all. If you can't see the outcome in advance, you have to decide based on the information you have now, and you have to live with the consequences. That alone can reveal a lot about character, judgment, and adaptability. Then there's the physical vulnerability we all share. Bodies need food, water, and rest. They're subject to injury and illness. They wear out over time. None of us gets to opt out of this limitation. In a way, it levels the playing field. No matter where you start, you're bound by the same basic needs. In a test scenario, this ensures that survival is never automatic. It has to be earned day after day by meeting those needs despite whatever else might be happening. Pain, both physical and emotional, might be another built-in rule. It's a signal that something is wrong, but it's also a teacher. Pain changes behaviour. It pushes you to avoid certain actions and to seek out solutions. It can deepen empathy when you see someone else suffering in a way you understand. If this were a designed environment, pain would be an essential tool. Without it, there's no immediate feedback for bad choices or dangerous situations. With it, there's constant data about how we respond to difficulty, whether we avoid it, face it, or use it as a reason to help others. Loss is another rule that seems to be everywhere. Nothing and no one here is permanent. People, possessions, opportunities, all of them can disappear, sometimes without warning. In a test, that could be intentional, a way to see how participants handle change that they can't prevent. Do they cling to what's gone, adapt to what's left, or build something new entirely? In everyday life, loss feels personal, but in the larger picture it could be one of the most revealing measures of all. On top of the universal rules, there are the ones that come from the societies we live in. These aren't fixed by nature, they're made by people, but they're just as real in their effects. Laws, customs, and unwritten expectations shape what's acceptable, what's rewarded, and what's punished. They vary from place to place, which makes them even more interesting from a testing perspective. Someone growing up in one part of the world might be praised for something that's frowned upon elsewhere. That variation could be part of the design, a way to see how people navigate conflicting systems, or whether they question the rules they're given. And then there are the rules that seem almost designed to create tension. Resources are limited. There isn't enough of everything for everyone to have as much as they want. That scarcity forces decisions. Do you share or take more for yourself? Do you compete or cooperate? Do you hoard out of fear or trust that you'll get what you need? In a cooperative game, scarcity tests teamwork. In a competitive one, it tests strategy. Here, it tests both, because we live in a mix of cooperation and competition all the time. Not all the rules are about restriction. Some are about opportunity, but those come with their own hidden limits. You can learn new skills, build relationships, create things that didn't exist before. You can move to new places, change careers, start over entirely if you're willing to take the risk. But every opportunity has a cost in time, energy, or resources, and the rule about time moving forward means you can't take every opportunity that comes your way. You have to choose, and in choosing, you're tested. What makes these rules especially tricky is that they don't always reveal themselves right away. Some you learn through experience, others you never quite figure out even after decades. Sometimes you think you found a loophole, only to discover later that it's another part of the test, a scenario designed to see how you handle what looks like an easy win but turns out to have consequences. Even the things we call luck, good or bad, could be part of the structure. Randomness is a powerful testing tool because it keeps participants from becoming too comfortable. If you knew exactly when and how challenges would appear, you could prepare in advance every time. But when chance plays a role, you have to adapt on the spot. It's in those moments when the plan falls apart, when the unexpected happens. that you get the clearest picture of how someone reacts. It's also worth noticing that the rules aren't the same for everyone. We're not all born in the same circumstances. Some people start with wealth, health, and safety. Others start with poverty, illness, or danger. From one point of view, that seems unfair. From another, it's a way to measure different variables. How do people respond when they begin with an advantage? How do they respond when they begin at a disadvantage? Do the starting conditions predict the outcome? Or can determination, intelligence, and support from others change the result? If you think about it this way, the diversity of human experience isn't a flaw, it's the point. The variation in starting positions, environments, and challenges creates a wide range of possible responses. In a test, that's exactly what you'd want if the goal is to gather as much information as possible about how intelligent, adaptable beings handle life. And yet, even knowing all of this, we don't get a rule book. There's no list to check off, no official guide telling you which actions lead to a better score. We have to guess, experiment, and learn as we go. That uncertainty can be frustrating, but it's also what makes the process revealing. If you knew exactly what was being measured, you might tailor your behavior to fit it. Without that knowledge, your actions show your real priorities, not just the ones that would earn you points. In that way, the rules we never agreed to are less like a strict set of laws and more like the physics of the game we're in. They set the boundaries of what's possible, the conditions under which we operate. You can't change them, but you can learn to work within them. And in doing so, you reveal something about yourself. It's possible that the very act of learning the rules is part of the test. Some people go through life without ever thinking about them. Others spend years trying to understand the system, looking for patterns, pushing against the limits to see where they give. In an environment designed to evaluate adaptability, both approaches could be worth observing. The more you think about it, the more these invisible agreements start to stand out. They're in the way societies form hierarchies, in the way nature cycles through growth and decay, in the way every living thing has to give energy to get it. They're woven into the structure of the world so deeply that we rarely question them, and when we do, we often find there's no easy answer. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the test isn't about following the rules perfectly, but about what you do when you understand them, or when you realize you never truly will. That's where the real decisions happen. That's where you choose whether to accept things as they are, try to change them, or work around them in ways no one's thought of yet. When you look at it that way, the rules are less of a prison and more of a framework. They don't tell you exactly what to do, but they give shape to the space in which you act. And in that space, the real story plays out. Which means that if Earth is a test, the next place to look for clues isn't just in the structure of the environment or the limits on our lives. It's in the stories we've been telling about why we're here for as long as we've been able to tell them. If you go looking for the earliest ideas about why we're here, you don't find equations or laboratory notes. You find stories, passed down by memory long before writing, carved into stone, painted on cave walls, spoken around fires, whispered in temples. Long before anyone had the tools to measure the distance to the sun or map the ocean floor, people were already trying to explain life in terms that made sense to them. And over, in different places and times, you find the same thread. Life is a kind of trial. Sometimes it's presented as a straightforward test of morality. In ancient Egypt, for example, one of the most famous images from their mythology is the weighing of the heart. After death, the heart of the deceased would be placed on a scale opposite the feather of Maat, the goddess of truth and order. If the heart was lighter than the feather, you could enter the afterlife. If it was heavier, it was devoured, and your existence ended. It's a striking image, and it sends a clear message. What you did in life determined what happened after. That's not just storytelling. That's a belief in a system that evaluates and judges every individual. In ancient Greece, philosophers often framed life as a proving ground for the soul. Plato spoke about the immortal soul being tested through its earthly experiences, learning and refining itself through each lifetime. In his dialogues, there's a sense that the physical world is an imperfect place designed to challenge the mind and spirit, to prepare it for something beyond. Even the concept of virtue in Greek thought, qualities like courage, temperance, and justice, carries the weight of something you're expected to develop through effort, not something you're automatically given. Across the world in ancient China, Confucianism emphasized life as a continuous exercise in self-cultivation, an ongoing assessment of moral character. In Confucian teaching, a person's behavior in family, community, and governance was not just about practical order, it was a measure of who you were and whether you lived up to your role in a harmonious society. The test here wasn't necessarily about an afterlife, but about proving your worth through how you maintained balance and fulfilled your duties. Indigenous traditions in the Americas, Africa, and Oceania often speak in terms of journeys, trials, and lessons. In some Native American stories, life is seen as a path with obstacles meant to teach wisdom. In many African traditions, hardships are understood as essential experiences that prepare the spirit for its place among the ancestors. In Polynesian cultures, challenges at sea and on land are often tied to spiritual growth, with the idea that endurance, skill, and respect for the natural world are all measures of a person's readiness to join the ancestors or the gods. Religions built on written scripture tend to be even more explicit about life as a test. In Islam, the Quran repeatedly describes life as a trial from God, with rewards and consequences based on faith and actions. In Christianity, there's the concept of being judged at the end of life, with salvation or damnation depending on one's deeds and belief. In Hinduism, the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, samsara, is often described as a series of lessons, with karma acting as both the record and the mechanism of the test. What's fascinating is how these ideas persist across such different cultures and time periods. The specifics vary: who's administering the test, what's being measured, what the rewards and punishments look like, but the core remains the same. Life isn't random, it's a process with stakes. How you act matters, and there's something or someone keeping track. That similarity could be explained in several ways. Maybe it's evidence that different civilizations were all sensing the same underlying truth, each putting it into their own words. Maybe it's just a reflection of how human minds work. We want life to have meaning, and a test is an easy structure to understand. Or maybe it's something more strategic. If you were designing an environment like this, embedding the idea of a trial into the culture could be a way of steering behavior without direct interference. The belief that your actions are being watched and judged, even if you can't see the observer, can be a powerful motivator. You can see that in the way these ancient systems often balance reward and fear. Paradise, enlightenment, becoming one with the divine, those are appealing outcomes. Eternal punishment, exile, reincarnation into a less fortunate form, those are consequences most would want to avoid. In a world without constant surveillance or modern law enforcement, these beliefs worked as a kind of invisible framework for maintaining order. If Earth is a test, it's possible that these belief systems were not just spontaneous human creations, but also tools that served the larger structure. It's also worth noticing how many of these ancient tests involve both individual and communal aspects. It's not just about what you do alone, it's about how you function within a group. In many traditions, selfishness or harm to the community is one of the quickest ways to fail the test. Cooperation, generosity, and fulfilling your role are often the ways to succeed. If you are looking to measure whether a species could work together on a large scale, these would be exactly the values you'd want to encourage early on. Of course, these ancient whispers also leave room for doubt. If life is a test, why do the rules seem so different depending on where and when you're born? Why does one culture say the key is faith in a specific god, while another says it's living in harmony with nature, and another says it's mastering certain virtues? If this were a controlled experiment, you could argue that the variety is part of the design. By giving different groups different instructions, You could see how they develop, how they interact when they meet, and whether they can reconcile their differences. And that raises another possibility. Maybe the test isn't about the rules themselves, but about what we do when the rules conflict. History is full of moments where different cultures, each convinced they knew the correct path, came into contact. Sometimes those encounters led to exchange and cooperation. Other times, they led to conquest and destruction. From a testing perspective, both outcomes would be revealing. When you start thinking about the depth of these old beliefs, you realize they've shaped not just personal behavior, but the entire course of civilizations. They've influenced laws, inspired art, guided exploration, and justified wars. If they are part of a larger test, their role would be far more than symbolic. They'd be a central mechanism in steering the human experiment. Even today, long after many of these ancient cultures have faded, their core ideas linger. The belief that life has a purpose beyond survival still shows up in secular philosophies, self-help movements, and the way we talk about personal growth. We might not call it a trial anymore, but the idea that we're here to learn, improve, or prove something is hard to shake. And maybe that persistence is the most telling sign of all. Across thousands of years, countless languages, and every kind of human society, we keep returning to the same question. What is this for? The answers we've given have been wrapped in myth, ritual, philosophy, and faith, but the question itself has never gone away. That could mean it's simply part of being human, or it could mean it's a question we're meant to keep asking, one of the test's central prompts, still waiting for us to figure out. Which naturally leads to the thought, if there is someone or something watching, what does their perspective look like? How would they see us, not as we see ourselves, but as a species moving through this long, unpredictable trial? If the idea of life as a test has been with us for as long as we've been telling stories, then the next step is to wonder who, if anyone, might be administering it. That's where the thought starts to shift from the symbolic to the literal. Ancient traditions gave names and faces to the ones they believed were watching. Gods, spirits, ancestors, celestial judges. They imagined them in human form or as animals or as forces of nature. But if you take the core idea and strip away the specific images, you're left with a simple, unsettling question. Is someone really out there, observing everything we do? If there is, they've been careful. Whoever they are, they haven't landed on the White House lawn or appeared in the middle of a crowded stadium to make their presence obvious. They haven't broadcast a clear message in every language, explaining the rules and goals. If they're watching, they're doing it in a way that leaves us guessing, and maybe that's intentional. In any experiment, if the subjects know exactly what's being studied, their behavior changes. That's as true in psychology labs as it is in classrooms or job interviews. If Earth is a test, keeping the observers hidden might be the only way to get unfiltered results. You could imagine a range of possibilities for who these watchers might be. The oldest and most familiar is the divine, a creator or a group of creators whose power is beyond our comprehension. In that version, everything we see is their work, and every moment of our lives is known to them. For those who believe this, the idea of being observed isn't unsettling, it's reassuring. It means there's a purpose, even if it's not fully explained, and that no act, good or bad, goes unnoticed. Then there's the extraterrestrial possibility. Somewhere out in the galaxy, or in another galaxy entirely, there could be a civilization so advanced that our entire planet is just one of countless projects they monitor. To them, Earth could be a controlled environment, like a nature reserve or a long-running field study. From their perspective, we might not be much different from wildlife researchers tagging animals to track their migration. The difference is that our tags might be invisible, built into the very fabric of the reality we experience. It's also possible to think about the watchers as future humans. If time travel or advanced simulation technology ever becomes real, it's conceivable that our descendants could look back on this period in history and decide to recreate it, not as entertainment, but as a study. In that scenario, we might be living inside a reconstruction of Earth's past, every detail recreated from historical records, every person simulated with enough complexity to behave as if they were real. The observers could be stepping in and out of our reality without us noticing, adjusting variables and seeing how we respond. That idea brings us closer to what's often called the simulation hypothesis, the notion that our entire world could be a highly detailed computer-generated environment run by some intelligence outside of it. If that's the case, then the observers aren't just watching from a distance. They're in complete control of the environment's rules, from the physics that govern matter to the events that unfold in history. Whether they be classified as scientists, engineers, or something closer to storytellers would depend on their motives. But whoever they are, if they're there at all, they've had to decide how visible to make themselves, and this is where the picture gets complicated. Throughout history, there have been moments when people claim to have seen or heard something that didn't fit the normal pattern of life. Strange lights in the sky, visions of beings from beyond, sudden insights or messages that seem to come from nowhere. To some, these are simply coincidences, illusions, or misunderstandings. To others, they're hints that the watchers aren't entirely absent, just cautious. The problem with hints is that they're open to interpretation. One person's miracle is another's optical illusion. A mysterious sound could be a technical glitch or a deliberate signal. If the watchers are real, and they want ambiguity, this is the perfect approach. Make appearances just rare and strange enough that they spark curiosity, but not enough to remove doubt. That way, those who are inclined to believe will see evidence, and those who are inclined to doubt will find explanations. Both groups will continue behaving according to their own instincts, giving the observers a more complete picture. It's worth asking what they'd be looking for. If they're divine in nature, perhaps they're focused on moral and spiritual growth. Whether we learn to live with compassion, whether we resist the temptation to harm others for personal gain. If they're extraterrestrial, their goals could be more scientific, testing how an intelligent species develops technology, governance and social structures in an isolated environment. If they're future humans, their interest might be in understanding the turning points of history, the moments when we made choices that led to survival or disaster. The scale of observation could vary too. Some possibilities imagine every action being recorded, every thought somehow registered, as if each person's life is a complete file in a vast archive. Others suggest the focus might be on trends rather than individuals, watching how groups form and dissolve, how cultures change, how technology alters the balance between cooperation and conflict. In that sense, the observers might be less like exam proctors and more like ecologists watching a forest, noting the balance between species, the cycles of growth and collapse, the subtle changes over time. If they are there, their methods could be far beyond anything we can imagine. They might be able to alter events on a global scale without leaving a trace, nudging entire civilizations in one direction or another. Or they might only intervene in the smallest ways, like placing a single stone in a river to see how the current shifts. From our perspective, both kinds of actions could be invisible, hidden in the noise of history. There's also the possibility that we've mistaken their absence for non-existence. Just because we haven't detected them doesn't mean they're not there. We already live in a world full of signals and forces that we can't see without the right instruments. Radiation, magnetic fields, the vast web of radio transmissions passing through us every second. An observer with technology we can't comprehend could be close enough to touch without us having the faintest idea. And then there's the question of whether they care about the outcome in the same way we do. If we're the ones being tested, we naturally assume the results matter deeply. But to the observers, the test could be one of many. We might be one project among thousands, no more or less important than any other. That doesn't have to make our lives feel meaningless, but it does change the perspective. It's possible to imagine a scenario where our successes and failures are data points in a much larger study, interesting but not central to the lives of those collecting them. What makes the thought most unsettling isn't necessarily that someone is watching, it's that we don't know their intentions. Are they rooting for us to succeed? Are they indifferent, simply gathering information? Are they testing us for reasons we wouldn't even understand? Without that knowledge, we're left with speculation, and speculation can make you see patterns in places you'd normally overlook, not just in ancient myths, but in the way history unfolds, the way events seem to echo, the way certain moments feel like they were set up just to see how we'd react. If you imagine those moments as points where the watchers might be leaning in, taking notes, you start to wonder what's next. Because if they are there, then everything, from the rise and fall of empires to the way a single person treats a stranger, could be part of what they're evaluating. And that means our lives, no matter how small they seem in the vast scale of the universe, might be more visible than we've ever realized. Which naturally brings us to the question of how the environment they've been watching has changed. From small groups of humans spread across continents to interconnected civilizations that can share ideas, culture, and conflict in an instant. If this is a test, then the setting isn't static. It evolves, and so do the challenges. If you imagine the watchers, whoever they might be, looking down on Earth through the centuries, what they've been observing hasn't been a static experiment. It's been a classroom that keeps rearranging itself. The students change, the lessons change, the tools change, but the learning never stops. Civilization in that sense isn't just the backdrop for the test. It's one of the main testing instruments. It shapes the questions we face, the problems we have to solve, and the ways we interact with one another. It's easy to think of civilization as something that just happened, a slow accumulation of farming, building, trading, and organizing that led from small groups of people to vast interconnected societies. But if you look at it as part of a trial, you can start to see it differently. Small, scattered groups can only face certain kinds of challenges. They test individual skill, survival instincts, and the ability to cooperate in small numbers. Bring those groups together into villages, then towns, then cities, and you create new categories of problems. Scarcity on a larger scale, disputes between strangers, the need for shared rules that go beyond blood ties or personal reputation. In a classroom, the difficulty of the work usually increases as the students progress. If this is a test, civilization may be that increase in difficulty. As our societies have grown, so has the complexity of the situations we face. Instead of finding enough food for your family, you're figuring out how to feed millions. Instead of settling disagreements with your neighbour directly, you're navigating legal systems, political structures, and cultural norms. Instead of defending your group from a single threat, you're balancing diplomacy, trade, and the prevention of conflicts on a global scale. The Watchers, if they exist, wouldn't need to intervene in every detail. They could simply let civilization develop and watch how we adapt to its pressures. And those pressures are constant. Cities test our patience and cooperation by crowding millions of people into close quarters. Trade tests our fairness and restraint by offering both the temptation of greed and the opportunity for mutual benefit. Technology tests our judgment by giving us tools powerful enough to solve enormous problems, or create even bigger ones. If you step back and think about it, civilization forces us into a permanent group project. You can't opt out entirely. Even if you live alone in the wilderness, you're still affected by decisions made far away. The movement of goods, the impact of industry, the laws and agreements that shape borders and trade. This interconnectedness creates conditions you can't fully control, which is another hallmark of a well-designed test. How you respond when other people's actions affect your life says a lot about your adaptability, resourcefulness, and priorities. What's interesting is that civilization doesn't just test individuals, it tests the systems we build. Governments, economies, religions, educational institutions, and health systems are all attempts to organize human life at scale. Some work well for a while, then collapse under their own weight. Others adapt and survive for centuries. Each one is like a trial run of an idea. Can a society function if everyone is equal under the law? What happens when power is concentrated in the hands of a few? How does the introduction of a new technology reshape the balance between cooperation and competition? From the perspective of the watchers, these systems might be the real subjects of study. People live and die in the span of decades, but civilizations can last for hundreds or even thousands of years. Observing their rise and fall could reveal patterns about how intelligent beings organize themselves, what causes them to thrive, and what causes them to collapse. If the point of the test is to find out whether a species can manage large-scale cooperation without destroying itself, then civilization is the arena where that challenge plays out. And it's not just about cooperation. Civilizations also produce art, philosophy, science, and culture, all of which could be part of the evaluation. How does a species express itself when it's safe enough to do more than survive? What kinds of ideas do they value, and how do they pass them on? Do they use knowledge to improve life for everyone, or to create advantages for a select few? These are the kinds of questions that civilization naturally brings to the surface, without the watchers having to ask them directly. It's tempting to think that the test, if it exists, is about finding a single right way to run a civilization. But history suggests otherwise. The variety of social structures we've tried is enormous, from nomadic hunter-gatherer bands to sprawling empires, from strict hierarchies to experiments in direct democracy. Each has strengths and weaknesses, and each produces different results in terms of stability, fairness, and innovation. If the watchers are learning from us, they're not just grading us on success or failure, they're cataloguing the range of what's possible. You can see this in the way similar challenges reappear in different times and places. The details change, the weapons, the transportation, the methods of communication, but the underlying problems stay the same. How do you keep power from corrupting those who hold it? How do you balance individual freedom with the needs of the group? How do you respond when scarcity turns neighbours into competitors? These recurring themes might be less like accidents and more like core questions built into the test, appearing in different forms so they can't be solved once and forgotten. One of the most revealing aspects of civilization is how it handles change. Some societies adapt quickly to new ideas and technologies, while others resist until they're forced to shift. Change can come from within, as when reform movements challenge old systems, or from outside, as when one culture meets another and both are transformed. In either case, the process shows what values are truly important to a society, and how much it's willing to risk to preserve or abandon them. There's also the matter of conflict. Civilization doesn't erase it. If anything, it amplifies it. With more people, more resources, and more complexity, there are more opportunities for disagreement. From a testing perspective, this is another deliberate pressure point. How do large groups resolve disputes? Do they find peaceful compromises, or do they escalate into violence? Do they create institutions to prevent war? And if so, do those institutions last? The answers to these questions could say a lot about whether a species is ready for challenges beyond its own planet. Of course, civilization isn't all struggle. It's also a source of cooperation on a scale that would be impossible without it. The global effort to map the human genome, the building of the International Space Station, the creation of worldwide communication networks, these are achievements that require coordination among millions of people across cultures and continents. They're proof that large-scale collaboration is possible, at least in certain contexts. If the watchers are looking for evidence that we can work together, these might be among the most encouraging signs. Still, cooperation in one area doesn't guarantee it in another. A civilization can produce groundbreaking scientific advances while failing to provide basic needs for all its people. It can achieve incredible feats of engineering while neglecting the health of its environment. These contradictions might be some of the most important data points of all. They show the limits of our priorities and the trade-offs we're willing to accept. If you step back far enough, you can see civilization as a kind of long-term stress test. Every generation inherits the systems built by those before, tries to improve them, and either strengthens or weakens them in the process. Sometimes the changes are deliberate. Other times they're the result of accidents, discoveries, or disasters. In either case, The outcome is a constant reshaping of the human world. From the watcher's perspective, this slow churn might be the point. Not stability for its own sake, but the ability to navigate instability without losing the ability to cooperate and create. What makes this more compelling is that we're now in an era where civilizations are more connected than ever before. A decision made in one country can have global consequences within days or even hours. Technology has made it possible for ideas, goods, and conflicts to cross borders instantly. This interconnectedness could be the latest stage in the test, a way to see whether we can handle global interdependence without collapsing under the weight of our own complexity. In that sense, civilization isn't just the setting for the test. It's the test evolving in real time. The watchers, if they're there, don't have to change the rules every few centuries. They just have to let us change ourselves and see what happens. And as we've seen throughout history, what happens can be inspiring, destructive, or both at once. Which leads to the next layer of the question. If this classroom is designed to teach and measure, then some of its lessons are far harsher than others. Some are beautiful, full of cooperation and creativity. Others are brutal, pushing us to our limits in ways that feel less like education and more like punishment. And if Earth is a test, those moments of struggle might be among the most important questions we face. If civilization is the classroom, then suffering is one of its most persistent and unavoidable lessons. No matter where you live, no matter what systems are in place, no matter how much progress humanity seems to make, suffering keeps showing up in one form or another. It's not evenly distributed, it's not predictable, and it's not something anyone volunteers for. Yet it's everywhere, woven into the fabric of human experience so tightly that you can't imagine a version of a life without it. And if this is a test, suffering might be one of the central questions on the exam. It's not just the obvious physical forms, illness, injury, hunger, loss of shelter. Those are the most visible, but suffering can also be quieter and harder to measure. Loneliness, fear, guilt, uncertainty, regret over something you can't undo, the slow erosion of hope when a problem doesn't seem to have a solution. These kinds of pain don't leave visible scars, but they shape lives just as deeply as anything physical. From the perspective of an observer, these different forms of suffering could be like different test modules, each one designed to measure a specific quality: resilience, empathy, adaptability, or perhaps something we don't have a name for yet. The unsettling thing is that if this environment was deliberately designed, suffering could be there by choice, not by accident. That's a hard idea to sit with. Most of us are used to thinking of suffering as something to eliminate. In medicine, in technology, in politics, much of human effort has gone into trying to reduce pain and hardship. But in a testing framework, removing suffering entirely could defeat the purpose. It would be like giving a math exam without any problems to solve. If the goal is to see how we respond, the challenge has to remain. There are patterns to suffering that make it seem even more deliberate. It often comes without warning, forcing us to adapt quickly. It doesn't always strike in proportion to a person's actions. Sometimes good people face terrible hardship, while those who cause harm seem untouched. In human terms, this feels unfair. In testing terms, it could be intentional, an opportunity to see how people react when the world doesn't match their sense of justice. Do they become bitter? Do they work harder to create fairness for others? Do they lose faith in the idea of purpose altogether? Suffering also has a way of creating crossroads. A crisis can break someone down, but it can also push them to discover strengths they didn't know they had. It can turn strangers into allies, change the direction of a life, or spark a movement that affects thousands or millions. From the outside, these moments could be exactly the kind of turning points an observer would want to study. The same event could lead one person to despair and another to transformation. The difference between the two might say more about human nature than any easy victory ever could. If you look back through history, you can see entire eras defined by collective suffering. Wars, famines, Pandemics, natural disasters. They disrupt the structure of civilization, forcing societies to adapt or collapse. In some cases, the aftermath leads to breakthroughs in technology, medicine, or governance. In others, it leads to long periods of stagnation or decline. Again, from a testing perspective, both outcomes are informative. They show whether a group can turn hardship into growth, or whether it falls apart under pressure. One of the hardest aspects to accept is how often suffering is caused by other people. Violence, exploitation, neglect. These aren't the work of an uncaring universe, but of human choices. If Earth is a test, this could be one of the most important parts of it. Seeing how we treat each other when given the ability to cause harm or prevent it. Every act of cruelty and every act of kindness becomes part of the record. The contrast between the two might be what the test is really about. That's where empathy comes in, and empathy itself might be one of the most difficult things to measure without suffering. It's easy to be kind when nothing is at stake. It's harder when you have something to lose, when helping someone else costs you time, resources, or safety. Suffering creates those moments. Situations where helping is optional, but costly. Do we step in anyway? Do we ignore it? Do we convince ourselves it's not our responsibility? From the outside, these decisions could be as revealing as any scientific measurement. There's also the strange way suffering can connect people who might otherwise never meet. A shared hardship can break down social barriers, at least temporarily. It can make enemies see each other as human, or bring together people from entirely different worlds. In those moments, suffering becomes the catalyst for cooperation, even if it's not the kind of cooperation anyone would wish for. If the watchers are looking for signs of unity under pressure, these moments would stand out. But suffering doesn't guarantee unity. It can just as easily drive people apart, breeding resentment, mistrust, and selfishness. This dual nature, the potential to unite or divide, makes it a perfect variable to study. The same event that sparks generosity in one person might spark greed in another. The question isn't just who survives, but how they survive, and what kind of person they become in the process. On a personal level, suffering forces constant choices about perspective. Do you see yourself as a victim of circumstance, or as someone capable of shaping your response? Do you believe your pain has meaning, or do you see it as meaningless chaos? Those beliefs can influence every decision afterward, sometimes for a lifetime. If this is a test, the way we frame our own suffering might be just as important as the suffering itself. There's also the possibility that suffering is not just a test for individuals, but for entire systems. A crisis can reveal the strengths and weaknesses of governments, communities, and organizations. How quickly do they respond? Do they prioritize those in greatest need, or protect the interests of the powerful? Do they adapt their policies, or double down on failing approaches? From the outside, these responses could be like stress tests in engineering, push the system until it shows where it will break. For all of this, suffering remains something most of us want to avoid, and that desire might be part of the test as well. We invent medicines, safety devices, disaster prevention systems, all in an effort to reduce harm. That's a form of problem solving, and it's one of humanity's strengths. But it also comes with trade-offs. Sometimes the measures we create to prevent suffering cause new problems of their own. From the outside, watching how we balance prevention with unintended consequences would be another layer of observation. And then there's the question of meaning. Some people find ways to frame their suffering as part of a larger purpose, a spiritual journey, a test of faith, a contribution to a greater good. Others see it as meaningless and cruel, a flaw in the design of life. Both views can shape behavior in powerful ways. If the observers are looking for variety in responses, this might be one of the richest areas of data. The same pain can lead one person to activism, another to isolation, another to cynicism, and another to forgiveness. The most difficult thing about suffering, if you see it as part of a deliberate design, is accepting that it might not be meant to go away. Not entirely. Every generation works to make life better, and in many ways it does get better. Fewer people live in extreme poverty, more survive diseases that once were fatal, more have access to knowledge and opportunity. But suffering never disappears. It changes shape. Old dangers are replaced by new ones. The specific tests shift, but the presence of hardship remains constant. If you think of it like an ongoing evaluation, that constancy makes sense. Without adversity, there's nothing to reveal the choices we make under pressure. Without loss, there's no measure of how we value what we have. Without risk, there's no way to know how far we'll go to protect what matters to us. That doesn't make suffering easier to bear, but it does make it harder to dismiss as meaningless if you believe the environment is intentional. And so, suffering becomes not just an unfortunate part of life, but one of its most revealing features. It's the condition that forces us to decide over and over who we are and what we're willing to stand for. If Earth is a test, those decisions might be the most important answers we ever give, answers we're still giving, even now. Which brings us to a different kind of question. If the test is ongoing and suffering is part of it, what exactly are we being measured against? Not in the moral terms of ancient traditions, but in the broader sense of survival, cooperation, and long-term potential. Are we being judged as individuals or as a species? And if it's the latter, what does that say about where the test might lead next? When you step back far enough, far beyond the span of human history, suffering takes on an entirely different scale. It's not just the personal struggles of individuals or the challenges faced by a single civilization. It's the recurring pattern of life itself rising and falling, vanishing and returning in new forms. The planet has seen more endings than any of us can easily imagine, and just as many beginnings. If Earth is a test, these vast cycles might be the ultimate reset button, wiping the slate clean and seeing what emerges next. We tend to think of extinction as something rare, a catastrophic exception to the normal flow of life. But in geological terms, it's not rare at all. Most of the species that have ever existed are gone. The fossil record is a long archive of experiments that ended, some abruptly, some gradually, each one leaving behind clues but no living descendants. From the smallest organisms to the largest predators, extinction is the rule, not the exception. The causes are as varied as the forms of life that have been lost. Sometimes it's a slow change in climate, the gradual shifting of continents, or the steady alteration of ocean chemistry. Other times it's a sudden event, a massive volcanic eruption, an asteroid impact, a rapid shift in the atmosphere. Whatever the trigger, the result is the same. Entire branches of the tree of life cut off, leaving space for something new to grow. If you imagine the watchers observing all this, it's easy to see the appeal. In one sweep, an extinction event tests adaptability on a massive scale. It forces survivors to navigate an entirely changed environment, to find new ways to live, to evolve into forms that fit the new conditions. In some cases, the survivors are small, overlooked species that suddenly thrive in the absence of former giants. In others, entirely new lineages emerge to dominate. From a testing perspective, these are rich data points, demonstrations of how life responds when the rules change overnight. The most famous example in popular memory is the asteroid impact that ended the age of the dinosaurs. For tens of millions of years they had ruled the land, their dominance unquestioned. Then, in a geological instant, they were gone. The survivors, small mammals, birds, reptiles, faced a world stripped of its old order. Some adapted, some didn't. Eventually, one of those small mammalian lineages would give rise to us. If you see Earth as a test, it's hard not to notice how that one reset cleared the way for our own existence. But that wasn't the only reset. Long before the dinosaurs, there were other mass extinctions. The Permian-Triassic event, often called the Great Dying, which wiped out the majority of life in the oceans and on land. The Ordovician-Silurian extinction, which devastated marine life. Each one was a different kind of trial, removing most of what had existed and setting the stage for new forms of life to emerge. Each one changed the balance of the planet in ways that would have been unimaginable beforehand. From a human perspective, these events are unimaginably distant. But in the scale of the test, they could be deliberate intervals, like clearing the desk between assignments. If the watchers want to see not just how life adapts to slow changes, but how it handles rapid, high-stakes transformations, extinction and renewal are the perfect tools. They strip away stability, remove the familiar, and leave only those who can improvise under pressure. It's not just about biology either. Even within human history, there are cycles that echo this pattern on a smaller scale. Civilizations rise, reach their peak, and then collapse, often leaving behind only ruins and stories. Sometimes they fall to external forces, invasions, plagues, natural disasters. Other times they crumble from within, undone by political instability, economic collapse, or environmental degradation. In the wake of these collapses, new societies emerge, often borrowing ideas from the old but shaping them into something different. The fall of the Roman Empire is one example. Remembered for centuries as a symbol of both power and fragility, the collapse of the Maya civilization, the decline of ancient Mesopotamian cities, the disintegration of the Khmer Empire in Southeast Asia, each one is a reminder that no system is immune to change, and in each case, what came afterward was not simply a repeat of what had been before, but a reinvention, shaped by the lessons and losses of the past. From the standpoint of a test, these cycles could serve a similar function to mass extinction events in nature. They test the resilience of systems, the ability of survivors to adapt, and the capacity for innovation under pressure. They also provide opportunities for the introduction of entirely new ideas, technologies, and cultural frameworks, the intellectual equivalent of new species filling an empty ecological niche. It's tempting to see these cycles as failures, as if each collapse means the participants didn't pass the test. But another way to see them is as part of the process. In many educational systems, failure isn't the end, it's a step toward mastery. You take the test, see where you went wrong, and try again. The collapse of a civilization might not be a final judgment, but a way of clearing the field for a different attempt. If that's the case, then renewal is just as important as extinction. The new systems that emerge aren't created in a vacuum. They're shaped by the memory of what came before. Even if knowledge is lost, traces remain in architecture, artifacts, and oral traditions. These remnants can guide future generations, offering warnings and inspiration. Renewal is a chance to apply those lessons, to avoid the mistakes of the past, or to make entirely new ones. The interplay between extinction and renewal might be one of the most revealing aspects of life on Earth. Too much stability, and there's no pressure to adapt. Too much change, and there's no chance to build anything lasting. The balance between the two determines the pace and direction of development. In that balance, you can see a kind of rhythm. Long stretches of relative stability punctuated by sudden upheavals, each one reshaping the possibilities for what comes next. Humans are unique in one way. We can see these patterns and, at least in theory, prepare for them. We can study the past, identify risks, and try to prevent or mitigate the next collapse. That adds another layer to the test. If the watchers are observing, they might not just be interested in how we survive after disaster, but whether we can anticipate it and act before it happens. That's a different skill entirely, one that requires foresight, cooperation, and the willingness to act on incomplete information. So far our record is mixed. We've prevented some disasters, adapted to others, and ignored warnings until it was too late in still more cases. Climate change, nuclear proliferation, and ecosystem collapse are just a few of the challenges that could test our ability to break the cycle, to choose renewal without needing the extinction part first. Whether we can do that might be one of the most important questions in the current stage of the test, and there's an even deeper possibility that these cycles aren't random at all, but timed. In a long-term experiment, you might schedule resets to occur at intervals, giving each new iteration a similar starting point. The triggers could be natural phenomena, or they could be engineered by the watchers in ways we can't detect. If that's true, then the test might not just be about surviving change, but about recognizing the pattern and learning to adapt to it proactively. Whether deliberate or not, extinction and renewal have shaped every stage of life on this planet. They're the forces that have cleared paths for new possibilities, destroyed the complacent and rewarded the adaptable. From the first single-celled organisms to complex civilizations, everything that exists now is here because something else didn't make it. If Earth is a test, then these cycles are the most dramatic questions we face. Questions written not in words, but in the turning of ages, the rise and fall of species, the ruins left behind when one world ends and another begins. The answers aren't just in survival, but in what we build after, and whether it lasts long enough to face the next turning of the wheel. Which leads naturally to the thought that if we've been through this many times before, there might be patterns hidden in our own survival story. Patterns that could tell us what the test is leading toward, and whether we're getting any closer to whatever passing might look like. If the cycles of extinction and renewal are deliberate, if they've been shaped with precision rather than left to random chance, then it's worth asking a question that, once you think it, is hard to shake. What if all of this isn't just part of a natural system, but part of an entirely artificial one? What if the world we live in, from the smallest detail in a grain of sand to the vast sweep of galaxies overhead, isn't fundamentally real in the way we assume, but a kind of constructed environment? This is where the simulation hypothesis enters the conversation, not as a wild science fiction plot, but as a serious possibility entertained by philosophers, scientists, and technologists. The idea is deceptively simple. We might be living inside a simulation, created by an intelligence outside our reality. That intelligence could be a highly advanced alien civilization, future humans with unimaginable computational power, or something we can't categorize at all. Inside the simulation, everything would feel real because it's built to. The physics are consistent, the history is detailed, and the experiences are convincing. But outside it, there's a completely different level of reality, one we can't access, at least not directly. The unsettling part is that, according to some thinkers, it might actually be more likely that we are in a simulation than not. The reasoning goes like this. If any civilization anywhere reaches the point where they can simulate conscious beings and detailed environments, they probably won't do it just once. They might run countless simulations for research, entertainment, or purposes we can't guess. If that's the case, the number of simulated worlds could vastly outnumber real ones, meaning that statistically, the odds of us being in the original physical reality could be extremely small. If you take this seriously, it offers a very different way to interpret the cycles of extinction and renewal we've seen throughout Earth's history. In a simulation, those could be programmed events. Large-scale environmental resets triggered by code, designed to test how the inhabitants respond to sudden change. Each extinction event could be like hitting a reset switch on part of the simulation, clearing out certain parameters and introducing new variables to see what happens. From the perspective of the designers, this would be a controlled way to study adaptability over vast stretches of simulated time. The simulation hypothesis also offers an explanation for some of the stranger aspects of our universe. The way physical constants seem fine-tuned for life, for example. In physics, the values of certain fundamental properties, like the strength of gravity or the mass of the electron, seem oddly precise. If they were even slightly different, life as we know it wouldn't exist. In a simulation, this wouldn't have to be a coincidence. Those constants could be deliberately set by the programmers, just like a game designer sets the rules of their virtual world. It also raises questions about the apparent limits of our reality. In computing, processing power is finite, so simulations often optimize resources by rendering only what's necessary at any given moment. If the universe we experience works the same way, there could be limits to what's actually rendered in full detail. For instance, the world beyond our direct observation might exist only as data until it's needed. Some physicists have even speculated that certain unexplained phenomena in quantum mechanics, like the observer effect, could hint at an underlying computational structure, as if the universe updates only when observed. And then there's the matter of glitches. In our technology, no system is perfect. Even highly advanced simulations could have small errors, moments when the environment doesn't behave exactly as intended. In human life, strange coincidences, impossible seeming patterns, or sudden changes in probability could be interpreted as these glitches, brief glimpses of the underlying code showing through. Most people dismiss such moments as chance, but in a simulation framework they take on a different weight. Of course, if we are in a simulation, the natural next question is why. The purposes could be as varied as the possible designers. If it's an advanced alien civilization, maybe they're studying the development of intelligent life under different conditions. If it's future humans, perhaps they're running simulations of their own history to understand it better, or to test scenarios before making decisions in their own time. It's even possible the simulation is entertainment, an elaborate form of storytelling or immersive experience for beings who find our struggles and triumphs worth watching. The idea also reframes the possibility of a test. In a physical world, the test might be a metaphor for life's challenges. In a simulation, it could be literal. The programmers could have built the environment with specific conditions and objectives to measure behavior. The cycles of extinction and renewal could be part of those objectives, as could the moral, social and technological challenges we face. Every choice we make, individually and collectively, could be logged and analysed in real time. There's an unsettling implication here. In a simulation, the observers have the ability to intervene at any moment, altering conditions to see how we respond. That intervention could be as small as influencing the outcome of a single event, or as large as triggering global changes in climate, resources, or political stability. From our perspective, these would look like natural events or human-caused developments. From theirs, they'd be intentional manipulations of the environment. And yet, if this is true, there's a kind of strange safety in it. In most simulations, the simulated being can't die in any ultimate sense. Their consciousness is part of the code, and if the program is stopped or altered, it can be saved, copied, or transferred. That doesn't make the experience inside the simulation any less real to us, but it does open the door to the idea that death might not mean the end from the perspective of the designers. Still, the simulation hypothesis leaves us with more questions than answers. If the designers are capable of creating a reality this detailed, why reveal it at all? Why not keep it completely seamless, without even the faintest hint of its artificial nature? One possibility is that part of the test is whether we can figure it out. In a world where the truth is hidden but discoverable, those who look closely enough might eventually see patterns that point beyond the surface. That act of seeing could itself be part of what's being measured. Another question is whether we could ever leave the simulation, not just die within it, but actually exit to whatever's outside. In theory, if our consciousness is just data, it could be transferred to a different system or into a physical body in another reality. But whether the designers would allow that is another matter entirely. If the purpose is to observe, they might keep the boundaries firmly closed. If the purpose is to train or prepare us, there might be a point at which graduation means moving into a different reality. For now, we're left inside, looking for signs. And those signs, if they exist, could be anywhere. In the patterns of history, in the fine-tuning of physics, in the moments that feel too precise or too strange to be random. Each one is a possible crack in the surface, an invitation to look deeper. Whether we ever find proof might depend on whether proof is part of the design, or whether uncertainty is the point. And if uncertainty is the point, then the simulation hypothesis might not be a theory to solve, but a lens to look through, a way to see the test as something that isn't just playing out on Earth, but in an environment whose boundaries we can't yet see. The extinction events, the renewal cycles, the suffering, the cooperation and conflict of civilization, all of it could be lines in a program, still running, still being evaluated. Which raises the next question. If this is all being run for a reason, what exactly are the parameters of the test? And more importantly, What outcome are the designers hoping for? If the simulation idea holds any truth, or even if we set it aside and just consider the possibility that Earth is some kind of trial, then the most unnerving part might be that we don't actually know what's being tested. It's one thing to sit down for an exam when you've been told the subject and format. It's another to realise you might be taking a test every day without being told the questions, the scoring system, or even the criteria for passing. That possibility changes the way you look at ordinary life, because suddenly everything becomes suspect. Every decision, every interaction, every impulse you either follow or resist, any of it could be part of an evaluation you're unaware of. The most effective tests in a controlled study are often the ones the participants don't know they're part of. Psychologists have used this principle for decades. When subjects are told exactly what's being measured, they change their behaviour, consciously or not, to try to match expectations. But if they believe they're doing something ordinary, filling out an unrelated survey, working on a neutral task, their genuine responses emerge. If Earth is a test, the same principle might apply on a planetary scale. The only way to see our unfiltered nature is to make the evaluation invisible. That means the real questions might not be written in the obvious places. They might be hiding inside the routines of everyday life. How you treat someone when you think there's nothing to gain. Whether you help a stranger when no one is watching. The way you behave when you have power over someone else and when they have power over you. These moments could be the equivalent of short answer questions, scattered throughout the day, each one contributing to a larger pattern. The unsettling part is that you can't fake a pattern for long. Even if you're aware of being observed in some vague way, the details of your behaviour eventually reveal what you really prioritise. Do you only act fairly when there's a reward? Do you abandon principles under stress? Do you stay consistent even when it costs you? In a hidden test, those patterns might matter more than the occasional dramatic choice. It's not just individuals who could be tested this way. Entire societies might be subject to invisible evaluations. How a community responds to scarcity could be one question. Whether a nation upholds its ideals when it's inconvenient could be another. Global cooperation in the face of a shared threat could be a large-scale version of the same thing. From the point of view of an external observer, watching these situations unfold without announcing the stakes would reveal far more about our true nature than asking us directly. The problem is that if we don't know the questions, we also don't know the scope of the answers. A decision that feels small could have far-reaching implications in the structure of the test. Ignoring someone in need might be weighted differently if it happens in a time of abundance versus a time of crisis. Choosing to cooperate might be valued differently depending on the personal risk involved. The same action could be interpreted in opposite ways depending on context, and we'd have no way of knowing which was which. And then there's the possibility that some of the questions are built into long-term scenarios, the kind that take decades or even centuries to play out. A civilization's environmental policies, for example, might be a test of foresight and responsibility. The results wouldn't be visible until the consequences arrived, and by then, most of the decision makers would be gone. In that kind of setup, the real subjects of the test aren't the individuals making the choices, but the species as a whole. If you think about it like that, even some of the most mundane parts of life could be part of the design. Economic systems could test fairness and greed. Legal systems could test justice and flexibility. Technology could test wisdom and restraint. These wouldn't be side effects. They'd be built-in conditions like sections on a sprawling exam, each one measuring a different capacity. We might move through them without recognizing them for what they are, interpreting them as normal life, when in fact they're deliberate challenges. In a way, this also reframes some of history's biggest turning points: wars, revolutions, scientific breakthroughs. What if they weren't just random products of human ambition and error, but milestones in a long sequence of evaluations? Each one could be designed to see how we handle shifts in power, the introduction of new knowledge, or the disruption of established systems. Success and failure might not even be measured in terms we understand. From the outside, both could be valuable for understanding how a species like ours functions. One of the more unnerving implications is that if the test is hidden, there's no guarantee the criteria match our own sense of morality. We might believe we're doing well by our own standards, being kind, working hard, protecting those we care about, and still be failing according to some unseen metric. Maybe the test is about adaptability more than kindness, or maybe it values collective survival over individual achievement. Without the answer key, we're navigating blind, hoping our instincts align with the objectives. And yet, that might be the point. A hidden test measures not just what we do when we know the rules, but how we act when we don't. Do we cling to personal values even without confirmation they're right? Do we adapt our behaviour in response to changing conditions or stay rigid and predictable? In an environment like this, the lack of feedback isn't a flaw, it's part of the mechanism. The uncertainty forces us to reveal what matters to us most, because we can't tailor our actions to match the scoring system. This also explains why, if there are watchers, they might allow so much apparent randomness. Natural disasters, sudden opportunities, inexplicable strokes of luck or misfortune. All of these could be ways of introducing variables into the test without signalling that they're part of it. The more chaotic the environment, the harder it is to fake a response. True priorities emerge when plans are disrupted and control slips away. If you take this seriously, it makes the idea of passing or failing more complicated. In a traditional test, the outcome is clear. You either meet the requirements or you don't. In a hidden, ongoing test, the outcome might be more about accumulation, the sum of thousands of small decisions over time. No single action decides it, but together they form a picture of who we are, individually and collectively. The result might not even be binary. It could be a spectrum with different kinds of passing leading to different outcomes. What's more, the test might not end for everyone at the same time. Individuals could be evaluated out of the system at death, while the species as a whole remains under observation. The data from countless individual lifetimes could be used to shape the next phase of the test, altering conditions to push the group in new directions. This would mean the evaluation is both continuous and evolving, without a fixed endpoint until the designers decide it's time. In that light, the uncertainty we live with every day, the sense that we don't have all the answers, stops being a frustrating flaw of existence and starts looking like an intentional feature. If we knew exactly what was being tested, we could game the system. Without that knowledge, we have to navigate by our own moral compass, our own sense of reason, and our own capacity for empathy and foresight. Whether those are the right tools is something only the designers would know. It also leaves open the possibility that some of us might get closer to the truth than others. Certain individuals might notice patterns, draw connections, or recognize that certain scenarios feel too precise to be random. They might begin to suspect there's a structure beneath the surface, even if they can't see it clearly. In the context of the test, these people could be the ones the observers are most interested in, not because they have the answers, but because they're asking the right questions. And that brings us to the real challenge of living inside a test you don't know you're taking. It forces you to live with ambiguity. Every choice could matter, but you can't confirm which ones do. Every moment could be a question, but you don't get to see it written down. You're left to decide how to act in the absence of certainty, and in the end, that might be the purest test of all. If that's the case, then the real mystery isn't whether we're being tested, but what the next stage might look like. If the unseen examiners are collecting answers, sooner or later they'll decide it's time to move us forward. The only question is whether we'll recognise it when it happens, or whether it will look like just another part of ordinary life. If the tests are hidden, then the next question almost asks itself, how much of our behaviour is really ours to control? Free will sits at the heart of the idea that life can be evaluated. If we don't choose our actions, then it's hard to claim that our responses mean anything, and yet, the more you think about it, the more complicated it becomes to separate the choices we actively make from the conditions that shape them. The common assumption is that we act from our own desires, thoughts, and reasoning. But so much of what we do is influenced by things we didn't choose. The body we're born into, the time and place we live in, the family that raises us, the culture that surrounds us. These factors shape our instincts before we're even aware they exist. They set the stage for every decision, narrowing or expanding the possibilities we see as available. If Earth is a test, then free will might not be an all-or-nothing condition. It could be more like a spectrum, with each person's range of choices defined by circumstances they had no say in. That raises a problem for the idea of a fair evaluation. If one person is born into safety and abundance and another into poverty and danger, can their actions really be compared on equal terms? The Watchers, if they exist, would have to account for this. They might measure us not against some universal standard, but against what we could reasonably do within our own situation. In that model, the test isn't about reaching the same outcome, but about how well we navigate the particular hand we've been dealt. It also opens up the possibility that part of the test is about whether we can expand our own range of choices. Humans have the rare ability to reflect on our instincts and override them, at least sometimes. We can notice when our culture has given us a biased view, or when our fears are pushing us toward a bad decision. We can learn from experiences that don't just affect our own lives, but also prepare us to act differently next time. From an outside perspective, the measure might not be which choice we make in the first place, but whether we're capable of altering our decisions as we grow. But then there's another layer. What if free will itself is an illusion, at least in the strictest sense? Neuroscience has shown that the brain can begin preparing for an action milliseconds before we consciously decide to take it. Some experiments suggest that what we think of as a conscious decision might actually be more like a post-event explanation, the brain acting first and the mind creating a story afterward about why we did it. If that's true, then the entire framework of moral responsibility becomes harder to define. If the Watchers are real and have control over the simulation, or even just over the conditions of the test, they could influence our decisions in ways we'd never detect. Slight changes to our environment, the sequence of events in a day, or even our emotional state could steer us toward one outcome or another. This wouldn't have to be dramatic. In human psychology experiments, tiny changes in framing or timing can have enormous effects on choices. In a controlled environment like this, the possibilities for subtle manipulation are endless. And yet, even with those constraints, people still surprise each other. Acts of unexpected kindness or cruelty, sudden bursts of creativity or destruction, moments when someone defies all predictions. These are the places where free will might be most visible, if it exists at all. If the test is designed to measure anything, it might be looking for those deviations, the times when someone steps outside what the system could have reasonably expected of them. There's also the question of how much free will matters to the purpose of the test. If the goal is to see how we react to certain conditions, then predictability might not be a flaw, it might be the data itself. In that sense, the illusion of free will could be enough, as long as we believe we're acting autonomously. From our perspective, that belief would still shape how we approach problems and relationships, which in turn shapes the outcomes that can be observed. But for us, inside the system, the belief in free will has consequences beyond testing. It underpins our sense of responsibility, our laws and our ethics. Without it, punishment and reward become harder to justify. If no one is truly responsible for their actions, then concepts like justice or even moral growth start to lose their meaning. So even if the designers knew free will was limited or non-existent, they might still want us to believe in it. That belief keeps our social structures functioning and keeps us engaged in the challenges we face. The real twist might be that free will isn't just something we either have or don't. It could be another variable in the test itself. Maybe part of the experiment is to see whether we can recognize the limits on our freedom and work to expand them. This could apply on both personal and collective levels. On the personal side, that might mean resisting destructive impulses, overcoming biases, or developing new habits. On the collective side, it could mean changing laws, dismantling unjust systems, or creating opportunities for more people to have meaningful choices in their lives. That framing would make sense of a lot of what we see in history, the long struggles for civil rights, the debates over personal autonomy, the conflicts between authority and individual expression. Each of these could be a section of the test focused specifically on our relationship with choice and control. The outcomes wouldn't just measure what we do, but how much we fight to preserve or expand the ability to choose in the first place. And if this is part of the test, the observers might be looking for patterns over long stretches of time. Do we tend towards systems that limit choice for the sake of order, or toward ones that expand it at the risk of chaos? Do we use freedom to create stability, or to destabilize what already exists? The answers might say as much about us as a species as they do about any individual within it. What complicates all of this is that freedom isn't always comfortable. With more choices comes more responsibility and more potential for regret. Some people prefer strict rules and clear authority because it simplifies the mental load of decision-making. Others see too much freedom as dangerous, opening the door to actions that harm the community. The tension between these perspectives might itself be something the test is designed to provoke, watching how we balance individual autonomy against collective safety. And then there's the possibility that free will is conditional, something that can be earned or expanded through certain actions. In that model, the test isn't static but dynamic. The more we demonstrate the ability to use choice wisely, the more choices we're given. The less we do, the more constrained our environment becomes. From the inside, these changes might look like luck, privilege, or unfair disadvantages. From the outside, they'd be deliberate adjustments to see how we respond to different levels of control. If that's true, then even our perception of freedom could be part of the evaluation. Feeling trapped might push some to despair and others to rebellion. Feeling free might lead some to gratitude and others to complacency. The variety of responses could be the point, a way to see the full range of what this species does when given or denied the ability to shape its own path. In the end, whether free will is absolute, partial, or an illusion might matter less to the test than how we act within whatever range we do have. If we believe we have choices, we act as though we're responsible for them. If we discover limits, we decide whether to accept them or to try to break through. Either way, those decisions, real or perceived, become the data that tells the watchers who we are. And that brings us to a more personal angle on the test. If choice is central, then what we value when we make those choices becomes even more important. The question isn't just what we can do, but what we will do, and why. Which means the next place to look is at the moral variables, the shifting standards of right and wrong that guide us through a world where the rules of the test are hidden. If there's a test underway, and if the watchers, whoever they are, want to keep it hidden while still giving us enough information to act, the most natural place to put clues might be in the environment itself. Not in the form of obvious announcements or clear instructions, but as patterns, anomalies, and moments that make us stop and wonder whether we're seeing the edges of something bigger. The sky and the earth have always been our oldest canvases for meaning. They were the first things we stared at before we had writing, before we had nations, before we even had language to compare notes. And they still have the power to feel like messages, whether we treat them as coincidence, myth, or something deliberately placed. Throughout history, the sky has been the stage for some of humanity's most profound realizations and fears. Eclipses that turned day to night without warning, comets appearing suddenly in the heavens, trailing light across the darkness, meteor showers arriving like clockwork but interpreted as omens by those who didn't yet know their source. In every era, people have tried to read meaning in these events. To ancient eyes, a solar eclipse might have been the sky itself sending a warning or marking an important moment. Even now, in an age of astronomical science, there's a part of us that still feels a pull when the familiar order of the heavens is briefly broken. From the perspective of a hidden test, these disruptions could serve as reminders, subtle ways of saying, the world you think is stable can change without warning. They might be meant to nudge us toward humility, or to spark curiosity that leads to deeper understanding. The timing could even be deliberate, aligning rare celestial events with pivotal human moments. That's the kind of connection that's easy to dismiss as coincidence until you start to see a pattern. It's not just the rare events that hold meaning. Even the regular cycles of the sky, the phases of the moon, the slow shifting of the stars through the seasons could be part of the structure. For early civilizations, these cycles were essential for survival, marking the time to plant or harvest, to prepare for migrations or weather changes. In that sense, the sky was our first instruction manual, one that didn't speak in words but in recurring shapes and intervals. If Earth is a test, then teaching us to read those patterns might have been the first stage, training our ability to notice and predict. The Earth itself carries its own set of signs, and like the sky, they can be as dramatic as a volcanic eruption, or as subtle as the slow creep of climate over centuries. Natural disasters are often framed as purely destructive, but they also reveal how well we can respond to sudden change. Floods test cooperation and resourcefulness. Earthquakes test preparedness and resilience. Droughts test long-term planning and adaptability. Each one exposes the strengths and weaknesses of the systems we've built, forcing us to confront the gap between how we think the world works and how it actually behaves. From a test designer's perspective, the planet is a perfect variable generator. It can deliver challenges at different scales, local, regional, global, without tipping its hand about whether they're natural or introduced. If the Watchers wanted to increase the difficulty, they could make disasters cluster together or align them with moments of political or social tension to see how multiple pressures interact. The result would be a more complex test, one that measures not just how we handle each problem, but how we manage them in combination. And then there are the signs that don't fit neatly into either natural or artificial categories, anomalies that resist easy explanation. Strange sounds reported from deep in the ocean, lights in the upper atmosphere that don't match known weather or astronomical events, sudden shifts in the behavior of animals, sometimes before disasters, sometimes without any clear cause. These kinds of occurrences have been recorded in folklore for centuries, and even in modern times they often spark speculation about whether we're seeing more than we understand. Of course, not every anomaly is a message. The Earth is a complex, dynamic system, and complexity always produces surprises. But if you're looking for signs of a test, these anomalies take on a different significance. They could be calibration checks, the equivalent of tapping a microphone to make sure it's working, or adjusting the lighting in a theatre to see how the audience reacts. From the inside, they're mysteries. From the outside, they could be routine maintenance. There's also the possibility that some signs are meant to be cumulative. A single unexplained event might be easy to dismiss, but a sequence of them, spaced over years or decades, could act like a breadcrumb trail. The trick is that different people would notice different breadcrumbs depending on their interests, location, and awareness. Only when enough observations are combined does the pattern start to emerge, and even then, it might be open to multiple interpretations. It's worth remembering that humans are pattern-seeking creatures by nature. We're good at spotting connections, sometimes so good that we see them where none exist. This is both a strength and a vulnerability in the context of a hidden test. On the one hand, it allows us to piece together genuine clues. On the other, it means we can chase false patterns endlessly, convinced we're uncovering meaning when we're really looking at noise. A well-designed test could exploit this tendency, placing both real and misleading signs to see who can tell the difference. In the realm of the sky, for example, some astronomical alignments happen purely by chance, while others follow predictable cycles. The challenge is recognizing which is which, and then deciding what, if anything, to do with that knowledge. On Earth, a sudden environmental shift might be part of a long natural cycle, or it might be a genuine outlier. Without complete information, we're forced to act based on probabilities, intuition, and the weight of evidence we can gather. That process itself could be part of what's being measured. The question is whether the Watchers, if they exist, ever intend for us to find definitive proof in these signs? Maybe the goal is not to confirm their presence, but to keep us looking. A species that's always searching for meaning is a species that keeps developing tools, building knowledge, and pushing the boundaries of understanding. Even if we never get a clear answer, the pursuit itself changes us, and that change might be the real point. But if there are signs meant to be noticed, then the most important factor isn't just their existence, but our readiness to interpret them. That means education, communication, and the ability to share information widely. In the modern era, technology gives us the unprecedented ability to detect, record, and compare signs from all over the planet in real time. This could be a turning point in the test, the moment when the isolated fragments of observation start to form a global picture. Whether that picture points to a natural, self-contained world or to something designed from the outside remains to be seen. What's certain is that the sky and earth will keep providing events that challenge our assumptions, force us to adapt, and spark the question of whether we're seeing nature at work or catching glimpses of a larger plan. And if those glimpses are real, then the next question is whether they're warnings, instructions, or simply ways of reminding us that we're not as in control as we think. From here, it's only a small step to consider that if the signs are deliberate, they might not just be about our awareness. They could be testing how we act on that awareness, whether we change our behaviour, cooperate more, prepare better, or fall into conflict over the meaning of what we've seen. That possibility brings us directly into the question of moral variables, the shifting standards of right and wrong that shape how we respond to what the world shows us. If the watchers, or the system we're inside, are leaving signs in the sky and on the earth, then it's reasonable to think that noticing them isn't the end of the exercise. The real evaluation might begin when we decide what to do next. That's where morality becomes central. Not in the abstract, philosophical sense that fills books and classrooms, but in the lived reality of decisions that have weight. The idea of a moral scorecard suggests there's a ledger somewhere, invisible to us, where every decision is recorded and interpreted against whatever framework the test uses. We don't know the categories, we don't know the weighting, and we don't know the passing grade. But if it exists, then every choice might count toward it. In human society, scorekeeping is nothing new. We measure performance in sports, in academics, in job evaluations. We track our own progress in exercise routines, diets, savings accounts. When we know the rules, these systems make sense. You can see what's expected and you can measure your improvement. But the moral scorecard of a hidden test is different. It's opaque, running in the background whether we believe in it or not. We have to guess what it values, and those guesses are shaped by the culture, upbringing, and personal experience we carry with us. If the test is designed by beings or intelligences outside our reality, their sense of morality might not map perfectly onto ours. We might think of morality in terms of honesty, compassion, fairness, and responsibility, but the designers could have an entirely different metric, something that measures efficiency, adaptability, or long-term species survival instead. That doesn't mean our values are wrong, it just means they might not align with what's being scored. A decision we see as morally good might score low if it reduces adaptability, for example. A decision we see as morally questionable might score high if it preserves the group over the individual. This mismatch creates a strange kind of uncertainty. Imagine you're in a game where you're not sure whether helping another player is considered a point in your favour or a strategic mistake. You'd have to rely on your own instincts, knowing full well that the system might be reading your actions differently. In a way, that's exactly where we are now, if the moral scorecard is real. We can only act according to the principles we believe are right, and accept that we might be evaluated by a different scale. It's possible that this uncertainty is intentional. If we knew exactly what actions would improve our score, we might simply optimize for that, performing goodness instead of living it. The hidden nature of the scorecard forces authenticity, or at least reveals it. When you can't see the scoreboard, you can't play to the crowd. You can only act from the values you actually hold, even if they're untested or unpopular. From a test design perspective, the real data might come from how we navigate moral ambiguity. Do we hold to a consistent principle even when it costs us, or do we shift our stance depending on the situation? Do we act differently when we know someone is watching versus when we think we're alone? These are the kinds of variables that reveal what's deeply ingrained versus what's conditional performance. It also raises the question of scale. The scorecard might be individual, tracking each person separately, or collective, tracking humanity as a whole. If it's collective, then our individual actions contribute to a shared result, which means one person's choices could, in theory, be offset or outweighed by another's. This could explain why moral progress often feels uneven. Some groups advance in empathy and fairness, while others regress, and the overall trajectory is a messy blend of both. Another layer to consider is whether the score is cumulative or weighted toward recent behaviour. In our own systems, some scorecards reset periodically, allowing for fresh starts, while others carry the full history of performance. If the watchers want to measure growth, they might value recent actions more heavily, treating past mistakes as less important if they're followed by improvement. On the other hand, if the point is consistency, the scorecard might track a lifetime of choices without ever clearing the record. The concept of a moral scorecard also reframes some of history's large-scale events. Wars, famines, technological revolutions. Each could be seen as a massive set of moral tests. Who steps up to protect others, and who exploits the chaos for personal gain? Who tells the truth in dangerous times, and who spreads falsehoods? In moments of crisis, morality isn't theoretical. It's practical, immediate, and often costly. Those are the decisions that might weigh most heavily in the score. In quieter times, the scoring might be subtler. It could come down to whether we use our comfort to help those in need, whether we tell the truth when it's easier to lie, whether we notice and respond to suffering that isn't directly our own. These decisions might not feel dramatic in the moment, but if the scorecard values sustained patterns of behaviour, they could be just as significant as the high-stakes moments. And then there's the unsettling possibility that the scorecard isn't just about what we do, but about what we choose not to do. In human law, we recognise crimes of commission, doing something harmful, and crimes of omission, failing to act when you could have prevented harm. If the watchers think in similar terms, then inaction in the face of injustice or danger might count against us just as much as actively causing harm. That possibility makes the test harder, because it's no longer just about avoiding wrong actions. It's about seeking out and performing right ones. There's also the question of whether intention matters. Human moral systems differ on this point. Some traditions emphasize the outcome of an action. If it causes harm, it's wrong, regardless of motive. Others focus on the intent behind the action. If you meant well, the harm might be more forgivable. If the watchers score based on outcomes, then good intentions without effective action might still count as failure. If they score based on intent, then a mistake made while trying to help could still be a passing mark. We have no way of knowing which approach applies, which means we can only act according to our own internal compass. Technology complicates this further. In the modern world, the reach of our actions is far greater than at any previous time. A single decision can have consequences across the planet, sometimes instantly. That means our moral score isn't limited to our immediate surroundings. Posting a harmful rumour online, for example, could affect people thousands of miles away, while a decision to share life-saving information could ripple across entire networks. If the scorecard exists, it might be tracking not just the act itself, but the scale and speed of its impact. If the purpose of the test is to measure morality under pressure, then the last few centuries have been an accelerated course. We've moved from small, localized communities to a globally interconnected civilization, where our choices can affect strangers we'll never meet. This shift might be deliberate, increasing the complexity of the moral test to see whether we can extend our empathy and responsibility beyond the people in our immediate circle. From this perspective, The moral scorecard isn't just an abstract idea. It's a running log of how well we navigate the expanding scope of our influence. It doesn't wait for us to be ready. It just records what we do when we're confronted with the chance to help, harm, or ignore. And because we can't see the results, we're left to wonder whether we're trending toward passing or failing. What makes this both fascinating and frustrating is that the scorecard, if it's real, might not be revealed until the very end, for individuals at the moment of death, for humanity, perhaps at some future point when the test is concluded. Until then, all we have is our own reflection and the feedback we get from the world around us, which is often noisy, inconsistent, and incomplete. That uncertainty might be the real design feature. It forces us to develop a morality that doesn't depend on visible rewards or punishments. It pushes us to act according to principles even when there's no clear sign that those principles are working in a measurable way. In other words, the scorecard might be hidden, not to trick us, but to make sure we're not simply playing to the scoreboard. And if that's the case, then our moral evolution, both as individuals and as a species, is happening right now in ways we may not fully recognize. Which means the next question isn't just how we're being scored, but what the purpose of that scoring really is. Is it preparation for something else? Is it a filter to see who moves on to another stage? Or is it an ongoing process with no final destination? A test we're meant to take endlessly, because the act of taking it is the point. If the watchers know, they haven't told us. And so we keep acting, choosing, and hoping that the moral calculations we're making align, at least roughly, with the system we can't see. That hope is what carries us into the deeper question of what the end of the test might look like, if there is one, and what happens when the results are finally in. If there's a moral scorecard, and if our actions are being tracked towards some unseen threshold, then it's natural to wonder whether there's an endpoint. Not just the personal endpoint we all face when our lives are over, but a collective one. A moment when the test ends for humanity as a whole. In that framework, the idea of graduation becomes both tempting and unsettling. Tempting because it suggests there's a reward or advancement waiting if we succeed. Unsettling because it also means there could be a final judgment about whether we've made it or not. In human terms, graduation is a transition. It marks the completion of one stage and the readiness to enter another. You move from the controlled environment of the classroom into a broader, less guided space. If Earth is a test, then graduation could mean leaving this environment, physically, spiritually, or in some way we can't yet imagine, for a new phase designed for those who've met the criteria. It could be a higher level of reality, a different kind of existence, or even a role reversal where we become the observers for someone else's test. The key question is what those criteria might be. If they're moral, then graduation could depend on reaching a certain level of empathy, fairness, or cooperation. If they're intellectual, it might require achieving a depth of understanding about the universe and our place in it. If they're about adaptability, then we might need to demonstrate that we can handle unpredictable changes without collapsing into chaos. It could also be a combination of all of these, measured not just in individuals but in the species as a whole. That last part is important, because it would mean that no single person could graduate early. We'd rise or fall together. In that model, the most advanced among us wouldn't just be working toward their own score, they'd be trying to raise the collective average. They might do this by teaching, inspiring, or creating systems that allow more people to succeed. From the perspective of the test, the ability to bring others along might be the highest mark of readiness. It's possible that graduation isn't about perfection, but about meeting a minimum threshold. In schools, not every graduate leaves with the same level of skill or knowledge. The requirement is simply to be prepared enough to function in the next stage. If the watchers are running a test, they might have a similar standard. We don't need to be flawless, just capable of handling what comes next without destroying ourselves or others. That would allow for imperfection, mistakes, and diversity of thought, as long as the overall trajectory is upward. Graduation could also be more subtle than we imagine. It might not come with a clear announcement or a visible departure from Earth. It could be a shift in the nature of the test itself, moving us into a new set of challenges without telling us we've passed the first set. The graduation might be hidden, just like the test, to prevent us from relaxing or coasting. We might already be in the early stages of it without realizing. If we think about it this way, some of the major leaps in human history could have been stages of advancement: the development of language, the emergence of agriculture, the scientific revolution, the digital age. Each one fundamentally changed how we live, work, and think. From an outside perspective, these might be less about random progress and more about deliberate steps in a long curriculum. The Watchers could be introducing new tools and challenges at key moments to see whether we can integrate them successfully. There's also the question of whether graduation is guaranteed if we meet the criteria, or whether it's a selective process. In human education, some students graduate while others repeat the course or drop out entirely. If the test works the same way, then not everyone might move on together. The idea of a selective graduation raises all kinds of ethical questions, both for us and for the Watchers. Would they choose only the most capable individuals, or the ones who've shown the greatest improvement? Would they value raw potential or proven reliability? In some traditions, this idea takes the form of ascension or enlightenment, the belief that individuals can reach a state of awareness or purity that lifts them out of the normal human condition. In others, it's collective, framed as a future era of peace, understanding, or unity that we'll all enter together once we're ready. The graduation model could encompass both, depending on whether the test is aimed at personal development, collective evolution, or both at once. If there is a graduation, then the process of getting there might be as important as the event itself. In human terms, education isn't just about passing the final exam. It's about everything you've learned and how you've changed along the way. The Watchers might care less about the moment we meet the criteria and more about how we reach them, whether we did it through exploitation and shortcuts or through collaboration and resilience. And then there's the uncomfortable possibility that graduation might also mean leaving behind those who aren't ready. That could be a literal separation, or it could mean that those who don't pass simply remain in the same environment, unaware that others have moved on. From their perspective, nothing would have changed. Just as a first-year student doesn't necessarily notice when older students graduate and leave the school. If the test is layered this way, then Earth might hold multiple overlapping stages of reality, with different groups experiencing different versions without knowing it. This also brings up the question of what happens to those who fail. In our own systems, failure can mean repeating the course, transferring to a different program, or leaving the system entirely. The Watchers might have similar outcomes, perhaps restarting the test for certain individuals or groups, or moving them into an environment better suited to their current level. If reincarnation is real, it could be a form of retesting, sending people back through different scenarios until they reach the required level. Graduation could also be a one-time event for the species. In that case, the risk is that if we fail, the opportunity might not come again. The test could end in a reset, with Earth either cleared of intelligent life or repurposed for something else. That sounds harsh, but in an experimental framework, not every trial leads to continuation. From the Watcher's perspective, failure might simply be part of the data collection, useful for understanding what doesn't work. If the moral scorecard is part of the preparation, then we might be closer to the threshold than we realize. Our interconnectedness, the rapid spread of information, and our ability to address global problems collectively are all new in historical terms. These could be the final skills we need before moving into whatever comes next. On the other hand, our ongoing conflicts, inequalities, and environmental damage might be signs that we're not ready. From the outside, those two trajectories, progress and self-destruction, could be playing out in parallel as the final stage of the test. One reason we might not see graduation coming is that we're looking for the wrong kind of signal. We might expect something dramatic, ships in the sky, a sudden shift in the laws of physics, a global message. But if the Watchers want to keep the test pure, the transition could be quiet, almost unnoticeable. A change in the way opportunities appear, a sudden reduction in certain types of suffering, the disappearance of problems we've struggled with for centuries. From inside, it might look like an unlikely run of good fortune. From outside, it would be the opening of the next stage. And if we ever do recognize it in the moment, the real challenge might be deciding how to act. Do we tell everyone? Do we try to prepare as many people as possible? Or do we focus on passing ourselves, knowing that not everyone will make it? Those questions aren't hypothetical if graduation is real. They're part of the moral test itself, asking whether we value collective success over personal advancement. If the possibility of graduation is on the table, then every choice we make now might matter more than we think. The scorecard could be nearing its conclusion, and the patterns we set today might tip the outcome one way or another. And if there is a moment when the results are revealed, we might find ourselves facing not just the watchers, but the undeniable truth about how we've lived in the environment they created. Whether that truth comes with celebration or disappointment depends on what we do now. And that thought alone is enough to make us look at the next part of the test differently. The part that might be about how we work together when the stakes are highest, and when the possibility of moving forward is within reach. If the test has the possibility of graduation, then by definition, it must also have the possibility of failure. And unlike the graduation scenario, which is easy to imagine in hopeful, inspiring terms, the fail state is more elusive and more disturbing. Not just because it's negative, but because, in the kind of test we seem to be in, failure wouldn't necessarily look like failure to those inside it. It might not be announced, it might not be obvious, and it might not even be recognized for what it is until long after it's happened, if at all. In human-designed systems, a fail state often means the end of the process for a particular participant. In a class, it's failing the final exam. In a game, it's losing all your lives or being unable to continue. In an experiment, it's producing results that don't meet the criteria. If Earth is a controlled environment, whether by higher intelligence, advanced extraterrestrials, or something even stranger, then the fail state could be any outcome that doesn't meet the purpose of the test. And that purpose could be much more specific than we assume. If the test is moral, failure might mean that we've proven ourselves incapable of reaching or sustaining a certain ethical standard. If it's about adaptability, failure could mean collapsing under environmental or social pressures we were supposed to survive. If it's about cooperation, failure could mean persistent division and self-destruction even when unity is possible. The danger is that from the inside, these outcomes might feel like just another rough period in history, not the final stage of collapse. One unsettling possibility is that the fail state doesn't happen all at once. It might be a slow erosion of the qualities the test is measuring, like a steady decay that becomes normal over time. A little less empathy, a little less curiosity, a little less willingness to work together. Each small decline might be easy to justify or ignore, until one day the system reaches a point where recovery is no longer possible. From the watcher's perspective, that moment would be the point of no return. From ours, it might look like business as usual. There's also the question of what failure triggers. In human experiments, when a test subject fails to meet the conditions, the experiment is often ended. In a simulation, that could mean shutting it down entirely. If Earth is a simulation, the fail state might literally mean the end of this version of reality. The program could be wiped, reset, or archived for study. We wouldn't see it coming, and from our perspective it could happen in an instant, lights out with no awareness afterward. Another option is that failure leads to a reset rather than complete erasure. The test could simply start over, perhaps with different conditions to see if a new attempt produces a better outcome. If reincarnation is real, it could be part of this loop. The same individuals or consciousnesses being placed back into a reconfigured environment to try again. In that sense, failure might not be final, but it could mean losing any progress we've made, both collectively and personally. That alone would be a devastating setback if the process is meant to be cumulative. Then there's the possibility that failure results in repurposing rather than ending. In an agricultural metaphor, if a crop fails, the land isn't necessarily destroyed, it's replanted with something else. Earth could be stripped of its current intelligent life and repopulated with another species, or left to evolve naturally without intervention. From the watcher's perspective, this might be no more emotional than swapping out one data set for another. From ours, it would be extinction. A more chilling possibility is that failure doesn't end the test at all, but shifts it into a different mode, not one designed to measure potential for growth, but one designed to contain, control, or exploit what remains. If the watchers have resources or data they can extract from us even in a failed state, they might keep us here, but with no chance of graduation. The environment could become more restrictive, more controlled, and more repetitive, designed not to challenge us toward improvement, but to keep us functioning at the level we've already proven we can't surpass. The fail state could also be asymmetrical. Instead of the entire species failing together, some groups or individuals might pass while others fail. In that case, the failing groups could be removed, reduced, or isolated, while the passing ones are moved on to whatever's next. We might not even know that separation has occurred. Those who remain could simply think the others have vanished through natural causes. If reality can be altered at will from the outside, this kind of selective culling could be invisible from within. One of the hardest aspects of thinking about failure in this context is that it might be based on metrics we don't value, or even know about. Imagine taking a test you think is about math, only to discover afterward that you are being graded on your handwriting. If the watchers are measuring something we're not paying attention to, we could fail without ever realizing we were off track. That's especially concerning if the scoring criteria are tied to long-term patterns we don't monitor closely. And yet some patterns might hint at how failure would look from the inside. If the test is about cooperation, the fail state could resemble a permanent fragmentation of our species, endless conflict, deep mistrust, and the inability to unite even in the face of shared threats. If it's about environmental stewardship, failure could look like the irreversible collapse of ecosystems, leading to a degraded, unstable planet that can't support the conditions needed for the test. If it's about adaptability, failure could be the point where we stop innovating, stop learning, and retreat into rigid, self-protective systems that resist change at all costs. The watchers, if they're real, might have thresholds for each of these, lines we can't see but can cross without knowing it. Once crossed, the decision could be made instantly. There's no reason to believe they'd wait for us to recognize the problem before acting. They might even consider it more merciful to end the test without warning, sparing us the awareness of our own failure. But there's another possibility, that failure is visible, just not in the way we expect. Instead of a sudden event, it could manifest as a world that feels increasingly small, stagnant, and hopeless. Opportunities would shrink, curiosity would fade, the sense that the future could be better would disappear. People might still live, work, and socialize, but without the spark of something larger driving them. In human terms, it would feel like drifting, but from the watcher's perspective, it would be the end of forward motion, the collapse of the experiment's purpose. If the fail state is real, then perhaps the most important thing isn't to know exactly what it looks like, but to notice when we're moving toward it. That could mean watching for signs of narrowing possibility, for the loss of our willingness to take risks in pursuit of progress, for the replacement of hope with resignation. If those trends are visible, then the test might still be in play, and there might still be time to reverse course. Of course, the fail state might not be avoidable for everyone. If the test includes both individual and collective scoring, it's possible for some to pass while others fail, with outcomes diverging accordingly. That's where the moral scorecard ties back in. It might be that personal choices can't save the whole species, but they can save the individual from the consequences of collective failure. On the other hand, the reverse could be true. Even a perfect personal score might not matter if the group as a whole falls below the required threshold. From the inside, this is frustrating because it means we're operating without knowing whether to focus on our own performance, the collective outcome, or both. But from the perspective of a test designer, that uncertainty is part of the point. It forces us to care about both levels, to balance personal growth with collective responsibility, and to do so without the guarantee that either will pay off. If failure is possible, then so is prevention. The real question is whether we can recognize the patterns in time to act. That means being honest about where we are, about the ways we're falling short, and about the fact that the stakes might be higher than they appear. Because if the test ends in failure, there may be no second chance. And if there is, it might not be one we recognize as ours, which leads directly into the next, equally pressing question. If this is all real, and if the test is still ongoing, then what tools do we have to improve our chances, to detect the watchers, to read the signs, and to influence the outcome before it's too late? If the possibility of failure is real, then it raises an even more subtle question. What if one of the things being measured isn't just our behavior or our morality, but whether we can figure out that we're being measured at all? In other words, what if self-awareness isn't just a byproduct of the test, but one of its core requirements? This would change the way we interpret almost everything. It would mean that noticing the signs, questioning the setup, and even speculating about the purpose of life could be as important as the actions we take. It would mean that the very conversation about whether Earth might be a test could be part of passing it. In human-designed experiments, there's a distinction between subjects who are unaware of the experiment and those who are told in advance that they're part of one. The latter group often behaves differently, sometimes in ways that invalidate the results. That's why so many psychological studies rely on partial information or outright concealment until the experiment is over. But there's also a more complex type of experiment, where the goal is to see if the participants can discover that they're in one without being told. In that setup, the discovery itself is the point. If Earth is such a setup, then the watchers might be waiting to see who notices. The signs we've talked about, the improbable fine-tuning of life's conditions, the moral patterns, the cycles of challenge and renewal, might not just be parts of the test, but hints toward its existence. Noticing them would require a certain kind of awareness, the ability to step outside our immediate concerns, to think about the structure we're inside rather than just the content of our lives. This raises the possibility that the test could have multiple tiers. The first is basic survival and adaptation, the level where most life operates. The second is social and moral complexity, the level where we begin to organize, cooperate, and create systems of meaning. The third and possibly final level could be meta-awareness, the recognition that we're inside a design system. That recognition might be the gateway to the next stage, whatever it is. Self-awareness at that level isn't just about abstract speculation, it's about what you do with the realization. In human terms, if you were a subject in an experiment and you figured it out, you could react in different ways. You could try to break the experiment, you could try to play to its goals to ensure you pass, or you could engage with it more thoughtfully, using the awareness to refine your behavior while still respecting the framework. The watchers, if they're evaluating self-awareness, might be looking at which of those responses we choose, both individually and collectively. One challenge with this idea is that self-awareness isn't evenly distributed. In any group, some will see patterns sooner than others. This could create a split between those who suspect there's a test and those who think life is purely random. That split could be another part of the measurement. Do those who suspect share their insight, or do they keep it to themselves? Do they try to convince others, or do they respect the right of others to remain unaware? Each of those choices reveals something about values and priorities. It's also possible that self-awareness could be dangerous to the process if it spreads too quickly. If the point of the test is to see how we behave under the assumption that life is natural and unobserved, then widespread belief that we're being tested could alter the results. We might start behaving performatively, doing what we think the watchers want rather than acting, according to our own developed principles. In that case, the watchers might prefer that awareness emerge slowly, in pockets, rather than all at once. This fits with the idea that not everyone is meant to pass in the same way. Some might excel at the moral or adaptive aspects without ever realizing the broader framework. Others might grasp the framework but struggle with the daily execution of the test's requirements. From the outside, both kinds of success might be valuable, just in different ways. The test could be designed to produce a range of outcomes rather than a single uniform result. The question then becomes, how does one demonstrate self-awareness without falling into the trap of artificial behaviour? The answer might lie in integrating the awareness into daily life without letting it override authenticity. That means continuing to act according to your values, but with an added layer of observation, watching not only what you do, but how it fits into the possible structure of the test. It's a delicate balance, and the ability to maintain it could be the real measure. From a historical perspective, moments of increased self-awareness have often coincided with major shifts in human civilization. The Enlightenment brought not just new knowledge, but a new way of thinking about knowledge itself. The space age forced us to see Earth as a single, fragile sphere in a vast void, changing how we think about our place in the universe. The digital age has connected us in ways that make it possible to share patterns and anomalies instantly. Each of these could be steps toward collective self-awareness, milestones on a path that the watchers might be monitoring closely. Of course, there's also the possibility that we've been here before. If the test has been run multiple times, either on Earth or elsewhere, then the pattern of reaching self-awareness might be a known stage, one that comes with predictable risks and opportunities. In previous runs, perhaps civilizations reached this stage and either used it to pass or misused it and failed. If so, the watchers could be watching us now with a particular kind of interest, knowing that this is a critical turning point. Self-awareness could also change the way we interpret challenges. If you believe life is random, a disaster might feel like bad luck. If you believe it's a test, the same disaster might feel like a deliberate obstacle. That shift in interpretation could influence how we respond, whether we give up, push harder, or look for the hidden lesson. The watchers might not care which interpretation we choose, only that we make one consciously rather than reacting purely on instinct. There's also a personal dimension to this. On an individual level, self-awareness about the possibility of a test could influence daily decisions in subtle but significant ways. It could make someone more patient in a difficult conversation, more willing to help a stranger, or more careful about the long-term consequences of a choice. These changes might not be visible on a large scale, but if enough individuals make them, the collective effect could be profound. At the same time, awareness can bring discomfort. The idea that you're being watched and evaluated, possibly without your consent, can feel intrusive or even oppressive. For some, this could lead to anxiety or resentment, a sense of being trapped in a system they didn't choose. That emotional response might itself be part of the measurement. Do we accept the structure we're in and work within it? Or do we resist it and try to escape? Do we become paranoid? Or do we find peace in the idea that there's a purpose behind it all? If the watchers value curiosity, then even doubt and skepticism could count as positive indicators. Blind belief might be less impressive than thoughtful questioning. The point might not be to accept the idea of the test uncritically, but to engage with it actively, to explore its implications, challenge its assumptions, and test its boundaries. In that sense, the process of questioning could be as important as the answers we arrive at. In the end, self-awareness as part of the exam would mean that the act of considering whether Earth is a test isn't a distraction from the test. It's one of the test's core activities. That possibility reframes speculation from idle curiosity into a meaningful contribution to whatever outcome lies ahead. And if that's true, then the very fact that we're thinking about it now could mean we've already crossed into a new phase of the process. What we do with that awareness, whether we use it to act more deliberately, to connect more deeply, or to prepare for possibilities we can't yet define, might be the next thing the watchers are waiting to see. And if we're already in that stage, then the next logical step is to consider how being observed, whether we're aware of it or not, changes the way we move through the world. If self-awareness is a stage of the exam, then one of the next questions is how that awareness interacts with the fact that we may be observed. Observation changes things. In science, it's recognized formally, the observer effect, the idea that measuring a system alters the system. In physics, the most famous example is the double slit experiment, where the act of watching particles changes the way they behave. In human behavior, it's equally true. People act differently when they know they're being watched, sometimes subtly, sometimes dramatically. That shift can work in both directions. For some, being observed sharpens performance. They stand straighter, choose their words more carefully, and follow the rules more closely. For others, it creates pressure that leads to mistakes or rebellion. In either case, the presence of an observer becomes part of the environment, shaping outcomes. If the watchers running Earth's test are aware of this, they might have designed the observation in a way that's neither completely hidden nor completely obvious, just enough for us to suspect without being certain. Uncertainty is powerful. If you know for sure you're being watched, your behavior might become calculated, even artificial. If you know for sure you're not being watched, you might relax in ways that reveal different aspects of yourself. But if you're not sure, you exist in a constant state of quiet calibration. Every action carries the question, what if this is being seen? That mental state could be exactly what the test is designed to produce, because it forces you to choose between acting from principle and acting for appearance. In our own systems, we see versions of this everywhere. Security cameras in public spaces reduce certain crimes, not necessarily because they catch offenders in the act, but because the possibility of being recorded alters decision-making. Performance reviews at work, teacher evaluations in schools, even the presence of a parent or friend in the room, all change behavior in ways that may not match what happens when no one is watching. The watchers, if they're real, would likely understand this and exploit it, using observation as both a measurement tool and a variable in the test itself. It's worth noting that observation doesn't always come from above. Humans watch each other constantly, and this peer-level surveillance is one of the most effective behavioral regulators we have. Social norms, reputations, and the desire for approval keep many people in line without formal enforcement. The watchers might count on this, knowing that even without direct interference, our awareness of being seen by each other will influence our moral and practical decisions. In that sense, they could set up the environment, release us into it, and let us police ourselves, all while they watch from a distance. But if the point is to measure authenticity, then observation creates a problem. It's hard to know whether someone's actions are genuine or just a performance. The solution might be selective observation. If the watchers can see everything, they can choose when to reveal their presence and when to stay hidden. In moments when they want to see natural behavior, they might ensure we feel unwatched. In moments when they want to see how we perform under scrutiny, they might make us aware, subtly, through signs, symbols, or anomalies that trigger a sense of being monitored. It's possible that some of those moments have already happened in your life. Times when you've suddenly felt the hairs on your neck rise, or sensed you were being looked at without visible evidence. Times when a coincidence felt too precise, as if it were placed there to see how you'd react. In a purely random world, those are just quirks of perception. In a test, they could be moments when the watchers lean in to take a closer look. If that's the case, then the observer effect isn't just a side phenomenon. It's an active tool in shaping and measuring us, and it might not always push us toward the same kinds of choices. Sometimes, knowing you're being watched encourages pro-social behavior, kindness, generosity, honesty. Other times, it provokes defensiveness, secrecy, or defiance. The watchers might be less interested in whether observation improves or worsens behavior, and more interested in which direction different people lean. The ratio between those responses could be one of the key statistics they're tracking. We should also consider that observation might not always be about the present. If the watchers can see our history, not just what we're doing now, but everything we've ever done, then the observer effect could extend backwards. The knowledge that actions leave a permanent record can shape decisions even when no one is visibly paying attention. Humans do this with laws and archives. The watchers could do it with something far more precise, a perfect memory of every moment in the test. In that case, the scorecard we talked about earlier wouldn't be an abstraction. It would be a literal record, impossible to erase or alter. There's a strange comfort and discomfort in that idea. On one hand, it means nothing is truly lost. Every good act, every effort, every moment of courage is preserved, even if it went unnoticed by other humans. On the other hand, it means every mistake, every lapse, every selfish choice is also there, recorded without the possibility of forgetting. Whether that feels inspiring or oppressive might say something about how we'd respond if we knew for certain we were being observed in this way. Observation could also be layered. Perhaps the watchers aren't the only observers. There could be multiple groups, higher intelligences, different civilizations, even future versions of ourselves, each with their own reasons for watching. Some might be interested in morality, others in technology, others in resilience. This overlapping observation could create a complex set of influences, each affecting the test in subtle ways. From our perspective, it would just feel like life, with its mix of coincidences, challenges, and moments of unexplained clarity. If the observer effect is built into the test, then it might explain certain patterns in human behavior that otherwise seem puzzling. Why do people sometimes behave better in public than in private? Why do revolutions in behavior often happen in times of increased communication and visibility? Why do we put so much effort into storytelling, art, and record keeping, even when survival is at stake? Perhaps on some deep level, we've evolved with the assumption that we are seen, not just by each other, but by something larger. This assumption could also be one of the watcher's tools for measurement. If they've designed the test well, then the question of whether we're observed becomes less important than how we act under the belief that we might be. That belief shapes cultures, religions, laws, and personal ethics. It creates systems of accountability that persist even when no physical watcher is present. And in doing so, it reveals the balance between our internal and external motivations. The observer effect in a test environment might also work in reverse. Sometimes the watchers might want to see what happens when observation is removed. What do people do when they believe they're truly alone, with no witnesses and no consequences? Those moments can be revealing, not because they show our best selves, but because they strip away performance and expose what remains. In that sense, the absence of observation could be just as valuable a data point as its presence. It's possible that the watchers alternate between these modes, periods of visible or suspected observation and periods of complete invisibility. This would allow them to compare how we behave under different conditions, building a richer understanding of our nature. The transitions between these modes might be marked by events that feel random to us, sudden bursts of attention on certain issues, followed by long stretches of neglect. From their perspective, these could be deliberate cycles in the experiment. If all of this is true, then the observer effect isn't just a quirk of human psychology. It's a central part of the environment we live in. It shapes our culture, our choices, and our self-image, even when we're not consciously aware of it. It's a silent force, pulling and pushing us toward different behaviors depending on the circumstances. And if the watchers have been running this for a long time, they might be able to predict our reactions with unsettling accuracy, just by adjusting the level and type of observation. Which leads to another possibility, that observation isn't just about watching us, but about teaching us to watch ourselves. Over time, we may internalize the presence of the watcher to the point where we no longer need them. We become our own observer, our own evaluator, our own guide. If that's part of the test, then the end goal might be for us to live as if we're always observed, not because we fear judgment, but because we've learned to hold ourselves to the standard we believe is right. And if we ever reach that point, it could be the moment when the watchers step back entirely, knowing the test has run its course. Not because they've stopped caring, but because we've learned to carry the essence of observation within ourselves. That possibility alone might be the bridge into the next part of the test, the one where it no longer matters whether someone is watching, because the decisions we make come from a place that no observer, however powerful, can alter. Whether or not this really is a test, the thought changes the way you move through life. It's one of those ideas that's difficult to unsee once you've considered it seriously. It gets under the surface of daily choices, the way you speak to someone who can't help you, the effort you put into a task no one is checking, the reaction you have to a small moment of unfairness. Even if no watcher exists, imagining one changes your internal posture toward the world. Some people already live this way without calling it a test. They work by principles that assume their actions matter beyond the immediate. For them, the concept of being evaluated isn't tied to a supernatural figure or a hidden observer or a cosmic purpose. It's a commitment to their own standards. Whether they believe in karma, fate, divine judgment, or nothing at all, they act as if their behaviour ripples outward in ways that can't be fully measured in the moment. If the test is real, those people might be the ones scoring highest without even trying to play the game. If it's not real, they've still built lives with meaning, purpose, and integrity, which are rewards in themselves. This is one of the strange comforts of the idea. If you act as if you're in a test, the benefits appear whether or not the test exists. You either pass something cosmic you can't prove, or you leave behind a trail of actions that improve the lives of others. In either case, you lose nothing by behaving as though it matters, but there's also a tension in it. The belief that life might be a test can sharpen focus and responsibility, but it can also create anxiety. For some, it feels motivating to imagine they're accountable to something bigger than themselves. For others, it feels like a weight. The pressure of constant evaluation, the fear of making a wrong move in a game they didn't sign up to play. This mix of feelings might be part of why the test theory isn't more widely embraced. It offers comfort to some and discomfort to others, often in equal measure. The way this idea lands often depends on personal experience. Someone who's faced injustice might resist the thought of a test because it implies someone set the obstacles on purpose. Someone who's overcome incredible odds might find reassurance in it, as if their struggle had meaning beyond survival. In either case, the idea functions like a lens. It doesn't change the facts of life, but it changes how those facts are interpreted. If the test isn't real, that doesn't make the lens useless. Belief systems, even when unprovable, often work because of the behaviours they inspire, not because of their literal truth. A person who believes in an afterlife might be more generous, not because there's proof of reward, but because the belief makes generosity feel more urgent. A person who believes in fate might take risks they wouldn't otherwise take, which in turn changes the trajectory of their life. In this way, what if Earth is a test works whether it's fact or fiction. It's the behaviour it prompts that matters. We see this in history. Societies that believe they're accountable to gods, ancestors, or future generations often create systems of ethics and cooperation that outlast the original belief. Even when the details of the belief fade, the habits remain. A culture might no longer think its harvest depends on a ritual, but it still gathers to share food and support one another because the practice has proven valuable in itself. The test idea could work the same way. Even if future generations reject the premise, the behaviours it shaped could survive. There's also the possibility that the test, real or not, operates best when people don't know which it is. If you knew for certain it was real, you might focus entirely on optimizing for the score, which could lead to shallow or manipulative actions. If you knew for certain it wasn't real, you might dismiss behaviours that have value only in the long term. Uncertainty keeps both possibilities alive, allowing the behaviours to flourish, without collapsing into cynicism or calculation. Even in the absence of proof, the question creates a kind of quiet accountability. Imagine waking up each day with two possible truths in mind. Either no one is watching and the meaning you make is the only meaning that exists, or someone is watching and your choices are part of something larger. In both scenarios, your actions still shape the immediate reality for yourself and the people around you. The difference is only in the scope of the ripple effect. Living as if it's a test can also sharpen your awareness of moments that matter. It draws attention to situations that might otherwise pass unnoticed. The decision to speak up when something's wrong, to offer help when it's inconvenient, to listen when you'd rather talk. In the framework of the test, these aren't just personal victories, they're opportunities to demonstrate growth, resilience, and empathy. Whether anyone is measuring them doesn't change the fact that they add weight to the kind of person you become. One challenge is that the test idea can be misused. History is full of examples where belief in a divine or cosmic evaluation has been used to control behavior, enforce conformity, or punish dissent. The difference between a healthy version of the belief and a harmful one often comes down to whether it encourages personal responsibility or demands blind obedience. A test worth passing should measure qualities that improve life for everyone involved, not just compliance with arbitrary rules. That's why, even if the test is real, it's important to examine the source of the rules you follow. If the watchers exist, they may not care whether you follow every tradition or ritual humans have invented. They may care more about whether you've learned to think critically, to question harmful systems, and to act with integrity even when it costs you. Blind obedience might be as much a sign of failure as selfish rebellion, because it suggests you've outsourced your moral judgment instead of developing it. It's also worth considering that if the test exists, its criteria might be simpler than we imagine. Humans have a tendency to complicate things, to create long lists of requirements, rituals, and formalities that may have nothing to do with the original goal. The real test might be as basic as, do you help when you can? Do you harm less than you could? And do you learn from the times you fail? If those are the measures, then the question of whether the test is real becomes less urgent, because those are good practices in any case. The most interesting part of the question might be its effect on perspective. When you think of life as a test, even temporarily, it becomes easier to see patterns that could otherwise seem random. The challenges you've faced, the people you've met, the turning points in your life, in a random world, they're just events. In a test world, they're placements, designed to measure something specific. The difference is subtle, but powerful, because it can shift frustration into patience and confusion into curiosity. Even if you ultimately reject the idea, the act of considering it can open up new ways of thinking about your place in the world. It can encourage you to reflect on the values you live by, to pay more attention to the impact you have, and to question whether your daily actions align with the kind of outcome you'd want if someone were keeping score. It can also remind you that many of the traits we value, patience, courage, kindness, are most visible in moments that feel like tests, whether or not they are. And perhaps that's the point. Maybe the truth about the test isn't meant to be known. Maybe its greatest value lies in the way it shapes our thinking and behavior simply by being possible. In that sense, the question is less about what's out there watching us, and more about what's in here, guiding us. Whether the test is an external reality or an internal construct, the effect is the same. It nudges us toward a version of ourselves we might not reach otherwise. The last step in this line of thought is to return to the personal. Whether or not the test exists, you still wake up each day and choose how to move through the world. You still interact with others in ways that either build or erode trust, kindness, and cooperation. You still face moments that feel like turning points, even if they don't show up on any scoreboard. The question of the test doesn't remove the weight of those choices. If anything, it adds to it. And so the possibility remains, hovering just out of reach, shaping decisions without forcing them, asking without answering. That's what makes it powerful. You don't need to prove it to live as if it's true. You just need to decide whether the version of yourself who acts as though it matters is the version you want to be. Wherever you happen to be right now, maybe you're at home, maybe you're travelling, maybe you're in a place you've been for years, or a place you just arrived in. This whole thought experiment has been about something that stretches beyond location. It's not just about where you are, but about what you do with the space and time you have. Whether or not Earth really is a test, you're already moving through something that feels like one in its own way. And unlike most tests, this one doesn't have a set schedule, no clear instructions at the top of the page, and no announcement that it's over. You only find out it's ended when you realise you're somewhere else entirely. You might be listening to this late at night, when the world is quieter and it's easier to think about big, strange questions without distraction. Or maybe it's the middle of the day, and this has been playing in the background while you do other things, and now you find yourself paying closer attention. That's one of the things about an idea like this. It doesn't really leave when the words stop. It follows you into the rest of your day, waiting for a quiet moment to rise back to the surface. If it's true that we're in some kind of test, then every single moment you've had so far has been part of it. Not just the obvious moments, the big choices, the dramatic events, but the quiet, unremarkable ones too. The way you've spoken to people you thought didn't matter to your future, the way you've handled frustration when no one was there to see it, the way you've treated yourself when you've made a mistake. These are all entries in whatever scorebook might exist, written down in the kind of ink that doesn't fade. And if it isn't a test, if this is all just the product of nature, chance, and the strange rules of the universe, then none of those things stop being important. You still have to decide how to handle other people, how to react to difficulty, how to treat yourself. The difference is only in the framing, and framing changes how we carry the weight. A test gives it structure, but even without the structure, the weight is still there. It's just less organised. That's why the idea works as a lens, even for those who don't believe it literally. If you choose to look through it, you'll start seeing things differently. You'll notice patterns in events that used to feel random. You'll start to think about whether challenges have a purpose. You'll catch yourself wondering if certain moments are meant to show you something about yourself. Whether or not there's a higher intelligence behind it, the shift in perspective changes your relationship with the world. Sometimes it's tempting to imagine the test, if it exists, as something grand, a massive, complex experiment with sophisticated technology or divine insight behind it. Other times, it's more useful to imagine it as simple, a way of seeing whether beings like us can live together without destroying each other, whether we can build something worth passing on, whether we can improve in ways that make survival more than just persistence. A grand test is exciting to imagine, but a simple one is often harder to pass. The truth is, you won't get a score at the end that you can compare to someone else's. There's no official announcement, no ceremony, no written feedback. Whatever happens after this stage, if anything happens, will be shaped by everything you've done and become, but you won't see the results in the way you're used to with other kinds of tests. You'll only see the next step, and by then the part you're in now will be over. That's part of why it's worth paying attention now. If you wait for confirmation before you start acting as if it matters, you may run out of time. It's like waiting to start studying until you've seen the final exam. By then, you've already missed all the chances to learn in the process. If this is a test, the test is happening every day, whether you believe in it or not. And maybe the point isn't to convince you that it's real. Maybe the point is to remind you that acting as though it's real gives you something to aim toward, something to measure yourself against that isn't about money, status, or survival alone. It's about the qualities that last beyond those things. The ones that, if there's anything beyond this life, might actually matter there too. It's strange to think that something so enormous could be happening without most people noticing. But if you've been with this thought for a while now, you've already noticed more than most. You've considered the possibility that life is being observed, that your choices are part of something bigger, that the details of your existence are more than just random noise. Even if you decide you don't believe it, that consideration has already changed you in some way. And now the question becomes, what will you do with that change? Will you carry it into tomorrow, into next week, into the years ahead? Will you let it guide you in moments when it would be easier to look away, when doing the right thing would cost more than doing the easy thing? Will you remember it when no one is watching, or when you think no one is? If this really is a test, then the watchers, whoever or whatever they are, will see that answer in your actions. If it's not, then the people around you will. Either way, the outcome is shaped by the same things: what you choose, what you build, what you leave behind. So, wherever you are right now, morning, evening, a busy street, a quiet room, you're still in it. The time is still running. The next moment is still yours to shape. And whether there's an end score waiting for you or not, you still get to decide how you want to be remembered and what kind of mark you'll leave on the place you've been given. That's the kind of question that keeps unfolding long after the conversation ends. And if you found it worth thinking about, then you already know the next part is yours to write.